OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
7:30 on this Friday morning. You're welcome along to OTB AM. It is Eoin and Adrian with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And we're getting ready for a brand new Premier League season. Daniel Harris will be joining us later on. We've also got Alan Quinlan on to preview the PRO14 final. And Cullen will be with us as well to chat through the big tennis talking points ahead of finals weekend at the US Open. We're also going to be joined by fantasy football nut Dave Moore, also a presenter on Today FM, of course, but more importantly, a fantasy football nut. He'll be going through Game Week 1 of FPL and how he's set ahead of that. So we'll get your tips in for Fantasy Premier League, and we've got an interview with Connacht coach Andy Friend. So plenty coming up over the course of the next 2.5 hours. We'd love to hear from you. You can tweet us at Off The Ball or comment on the stream if you're watching on YouTube. Before all of that, here is a little bit of last night's show. It's Thursday Night Football with John Giles.
Welcome back. It's Thursday's Off The Ball. Nathan with you until 10. It is 7:30, so it's time to talk to John Giles. Evening, John.
Evening, Nathan.
We get on to the start of the new Premier League season, but we might look back first on Stephen Kenny's first 2 games in charge of the Republic of Ireland. Results-wise, certainly not what he would have wanted, just 1 point from the 2 games against Bulgaria and Finland. In terms of learning about the players and planning for the playoff against Slovakia, do you think he'd have got what he wanted from the 2 games?
Well, he would have learned a lot, Nathan, but I think he would have expected better performances and better results. But that's the ideal. You don't get that. Well, most managers don't get when they're starting off like Stephen is starting off now, which means that you've got a group of players that you have ideas about who can play, who can't play, but you don't know and finally know until you see them play and see what's going on. So he's unfortunately only had 2 games in competitive competitions, Nathan. I think it takes managers about 6 to 8 matches to really get to know and finally clear in your head what is your best team.
It does seem as though it is quite radical quite quickly what he's trying to do, and in fairness to Stephen Kenny, he spoke about this in advance that he wanted to change the way the team were going to play, a more possession-based style, maybe play the game on the front foot a little bit more, and he also changed quite a few experienced personnel. Seamus Coleman dropping out of the side for the first time in I think it was 8 years, James McLean dropping out of the side, Jeff Hendrick didn't play the second day. Was it all too much too soon? Would he have been better off sticking with the old guard a little bit longer and easing in 1 or 2 players, or is he doing the right thing and laying down a marker right from the start?
Well, I think he's got to try out the players, Nathan. That's why he could do it 6 to 8 matches before he goes into a competitive match. Well, that's not the case. The only thing I wouldn't agree with is the leaving Seamus Coleman out for Doherty. Because there's certain things you can look at that you can learn from the previous manager or the previous results. And one of the things that was outstanding in Mick McCarthy's second reign, was that the goals against were very, very good. In other words, I think the back 5 were very, very good, Nathan. They didn't give. Did you know how many goals they gave away?
Yeah, they conceded 5 in the 8 matches.
8 matches. That's very, very good. And I thought that all those players were good. And what I don't agree with Stephen is that he left Seamus Coleman out to bring Doherty in. Now, I think Doherty is a very, very good player, very fine player, particularly for Wolves, where he's playing as a wing back, Nathan. Now, in the matches where we only lost the 5 goals, we had a flat back 4. In other words, Seamus Coleman is not a wing back; he's a full back. And when you're playing, that's a different thing altogether, being a wing back, which Doherty is very, very good at.
Yeah.
So I would stick with what was proven to be solid in the back 5, because I don't think Doherty is as good a defender as Seamus Coleman is. And I think it's vital to defend and get the results from the back that we got in the previous matches. So I wouldn't agree with that. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And I also believe that I think he's trying to play a what's the back at the back, Nathan. Playing, well, we used to call it the old offside.
Right, he's playing a very high line, yeah.
High line. Well, first, I don't agree with high line at all, because I think you're taking a chance all the time whether you're going to get the people offside. It used to be known as the old offside trap. That's the way I would see it. And with the back five that we have, I don't think it's necessary to make a dramatic change like that and the Coleman situation. Now, I don't want to be too hard on Stephen in any way. I think he deserves a run at the job. It's only the first 2 matches that he's played, and he'll get to know his best players as he goes along in the matches. In my own experience going to West Brom, for example, Nathan, I'd played against those lads for about 10 years, and I had at least 3 to 4 that I was totally wrong against, that I assumed they could do this, that and the other, and they couldn't. So you don't know until you actually see the players out on the field. You have ideas, like Stephen will have ideas who to play, but you don't know, Nathan, until you actually see them play. And he hasn't had that situation now. So it was very difficult for him, and I wouldn't pay too much interest. I wouldn't have too much interest in the results that he's had. It's a learning curve.
I understand where you're coming from when you look at the goals conceded statistic under Mick McCarthy, and 5 in 8 games is very impressive. But to counter that, Ireland only scored 7 goals in the 8 games in a group that included Gibraltar. And I suppose that is the worry when you look at the performances and how many chances Ireland gave up. There was a sense, I think, that everyone had that Ireland were very strong defensively. But was it actually that all those players had to do was defend, that they weren't expected to do anything else, that they sat incredibly deep, invited teams onto them, and that whereas if we're to score more goals, if Ireland are to score more goals under Stephen Kenny, he needs a bit more out of those defenders?
Well, you don't expect... Well, with respect, Nathan, I don't agree with that at all. You're not expecting the defenders to score goals.
But can you not expect them to create goals?
Which they did.
And can you not expect defenders to start attacks from deeper, to get on the ball a little bit more, rather than just a backs to the wall job?
Players, Nathan. No, defenders have to play. Defenders, our main job is to defend. When they win the ball, then they've got to give the ball to somebody. That's when the midfield players particularly come into it. But we're not strong in midfield. You have to go what you're strong with until you find that out. You have to find out. What they did is concede the 5 goals was to play with those players and play in a cover position. There was no high line in those particular matches. So what I'd be saying was, well, don't go with a high line and don't go with different defenders, because they've already done it. What you've got to worry about then is the midfield players and the strikers. That's a different situation altogether. But what you do with most teams is make sure your defence is good. And the defence in the last 2 matches haven't been as good as they were in the previous 5 matches. That's where I think that Stephen made a mistake. The other things he has to do, he has to see that quite rightly, they played a midfield 4, then he changed it for the next match, quite rightly, and some of the lads up front. That's what you have to do to find out. But if something is proven to be right, whether it be attacking or defending, then in my opinion, you stay with that.
He tried, as you mentioned, 6 different midfielders across the 2 games, changed the midfield. And I'm not sure if did any of the 6 really put their hand up and say, you know what, I got to start next month in the playoff against Slovakia?
I don't think so. I don't think any of the midfield situations worked, Nathan. So there'll be more trial and error in that particular area. I mean, what I'd seen, if I was picking the midfield now, and I don't have, I'd be starting like Stephen, I'd be starting from scratch. But what I'd have in my head is O'Dowda, Arthur, Brady, and McLean. That's what I'd have. That's what I would start with.
Right.
But there again, I'm not picking the team, because I think if we're not going to beat players from the middle of the field, Nathan. So the only players that we have, in my opinion, that are going to beat players is O'Dowda can beat players, and McLean can beat players. So I'd leave those 2 wide and get the ball out to them as much as possible. Because I think Brady is our best bet for picking a pass out. Arthur is industrious. But I don't think either of them are going to be outstanding midfield players of the calibre that we would like to have. So I would go with O'Dowda to beat the players and McLean to beat the players.
So you'd go with a 4 in mid... you'd essentially end up going with a 4-4-2 then?
Yes. Definitely. I wouldn't have the high line, and I would have Coleman in the team as a defender. I like Doherty. I like what he does for Wolves. He'll get you a few goals. from the back position.
Yeah.
But it was different the other day. See, a lot of time, I think he was trying to attack. See, when you're going to score goals tonight and you're like a forward, you have to think the best all the time. And for every 6 times you go in, you might only get it once. Now, if you're a goal-scoring fullback, that's the mentality Doherty has. So he can leave the defensive. He doesn't see his defensive duties, or in Wolves and anyway, he's encouraged to do what he does. But Ireland don't play with the wing-backs. And it's proven to be successful in the previous matches they played under McCarthy because of the 5 goals only 5 that we conceded in the 8 games.
Stephen Kenny has said that he's quite pragmatic and that he's not wedded to one system in terms of that 4-3-3, but it does feel as though he's going to continue with it for probably the game in Slovakia and maybe for a few more of these matches before the end of the year. Is it possible?
I wouldn't be too sure about that, Nathan.
Right.
I think, having looked at the matches, he might very well go back to the fullback situation. I don't know. I mean, Stephen is the manager. He's going to do. But I'd be surprised if he sticks with with Doherty in the wing back position as he plays it.
Yeah, but just in terms of the midfield then, because if he was to stick with what he went with the first 2 games and tried 3 in the midfield and either a James McCarthy at the base or a Harry Arter at the base, like if he wants to play that front foot football, maybe a bit more possession based, can he do that? It goes back to does he have the players with the skill set required for that type of midfield?
Well, if you play O'Dowd wide on the right and McLean wide on, you're not dependent that much on the midfield players to be creative because you have players to give it out to get on with doing their stuff down the wings, Nathan. I don't think we have a player in the group that's going to dominate from the middle of the field at all.
Yeah.
I think we're much of a muchness in that position, so that's why I would play 2 players in the middle and 2 wide, so as you give it out to the 2 players who can make progress from there. You see, if you look at the stats, Nathan, in the 2 matches, we had more possession of the ball than Bulgaria and Finland.
Yeah.
But keeping possession of the ball is one thing. You get it and you give it to the fullback, and you get it back and you give it to the other fullback. It doesn't get you anywhere. And actually, in the whole game of football at the moment, there are very few players. I mean, the ideal thing for a midfield player is to be able to beat and dribble past your opposing midfield player. It doesn't happen, or it very seldom happens. I watched England the other night, and they couldn't do it from midfield. They had Declan Rice and young Phillips from, and they were doing the thing. They get it, and there's no imagination.
Yeah,
in the game.
It's almost as if the coaching has changed, and that's what they're telling midfielders to do these days.
Yeah, I think so, Nathan. I don't know what the reason is, but there's very few midfielders. I hardly ever see it, and there's a lot of possession in the game. So when you see a match starting now, it goes back to the centre back, over to the full back across the pitch, and I know I might sound like an old timer talking about football, but some of it is unnecessary. You have to make progress. You don't win matches on stats. Like our stats in the 2 matches for possession of the ball was quite good, but we didn't look like scoring a goal, and that usually comes from midfield players. And I don't think we have midfield players that can go past players, but we have McLean who can go past and O'Dowd it. So you get it out to them and let them do those particular those jobs. That's the way I would see it. But obviously, if I was a manager, I'd have to play those players to see if it works, Nathan. You don't know. You have it in your head, this could happen. And Stephen hasn't got that luxury. I didn't have that luxury so far because he had to play players in his head. This is what they can do or this is what they can't do. So he's finding out about it. So I'd have great sympathy for him in that particular situation.
Stick with us, John. We do want to talk about the return of the Premier League. We'll take a quick break, though. Back as Thursday's Off the Ball. We're talking to John Giles. John, Premier League back this weekend. Leeds are back in the big time, up against Liverpool on Saturday. And we've been, overrun with Leeds United legends this week because we were talking to your good friend Eddie Gray on Tuesday night.
Yeah, he's a good lad, isn't he, Nathan?
Yeah, he's brilliant. We'd really good time talking to him. Lots of great nostalgia and a great storyteller. And considering we spent a lot of time talking about Eddie Gray over the last few years, we thought we might as well ask Eddie Gray about you. Here's what he had to say. And the great thing about having had John on the show is that that was an era of so many memorable teams, whether it was United with Best and Charlton, the Liverpool side that was emerging under Shankly, that great Celtic team. But I think Irish people probably know more about that Leeds side because of John than they do of any of those teams, and those names roll off the tongue, those names that you talk about. But the one man that actually we know little about from that time at Leeds is actually John Giles, because when he picks his all-time Leeds 11, he doesn't include himself. He'll talk about yourself, he'll talk about Billy Bremner. You might just give us what John Giles was like in 66, 67, 68, as both on the pitch and off the pitch.
Different people have different opinions about the game, you know, and when people say to me, who's the best player you played with, you know, and I'm splitting hairs, you know, I would come down in favour of John, you know, so John's been very modest when he says he wouldn't have been the best Leeds United 11. You know, I think all the players that I played with, I think that there's a good more than half the team would come down and in favour of John being the best player they played with. That's my opinion.
What was it about his game that made him so good?
Well, his knowledge of the game was tremendous. He had 2 great feet, a great passer of the ball, could score goals, could also get into great goal-scoring positions. And when I played outside left and, you know, he would knock the ball to me, you know, but he would say to me before the game, don't forget, Eddie, I'm always just inside you, an edge of that 18-yard box. You know, if you could buy somebody, you know, I'm always there. If somebody trying to cover the full-back, I'll always be available for you. Yeah, just his general knowledge of how to play the game and his tremendous ability. I mean, John could do it all. He could win the ball. He could pass the ball. He could buy people in tight areas. You know, Billy had great feet around the ball, terrific feet, but John had probably the better range of passing, you know. But that's no belittling Billy in any way, because I don't think I've seen many players that did a better range of passing with both feet than Johnny. I mean, the only other player, you know, the player that I think is the best British player I've ever seen is Bobby Charlton. You know, and Johnny's no far off that mark to me.
I don't know if you needed an ego boost, John, but better range of passing than Billy Bremner and close to Bobby Charlton. It's not bad.
Well, I have to pay him for that.
You'll owe him a few quid, all right. There was about 10 minutes of that.
I'll send it on to him, Nathan.
Do. Yeah, you obviously, listen, we got into, as we've done quite a bit recently, talking about just how brilliant that Leeds side were. And great to have them back in the Premier League as well, John. And funnily enough, it's Liverpool they go to, Liverpool as champions. And I think when you were with Leeds, when you came up from the second division, the first game that Leeds played back in 1964 at Elland Road was against Liverpool, who were the champions at the time. Yes,
they were the champions. We had the first match away to Villa, which we won, and then on the Wednesday night we played Liverpool, and we beat them 4-2, Nathan. Yeah, you got a goal. I got a goal that night, yeah. Then we went to Anfield the following week, and they beat us 2-1. So it was a great start, obviously, for Leeds at that time. They'd been out of the first, what was then the first division, for a long time as well, Nathan. You know. So to get the start that we did and went on, I mean, that was at the end of that season, Liverpool beat us in the cup final. That went on from 64 to 65, and Liverpool beat us for the first time they ever won the cup. But we finished above Liverpool in the league that year. We were pipped by Manchester United at that particular season, and I think we finished. They beat us on goal difference, Manchester United. So. Right. That was a huge season for Leeds, going back into the first division for the first time. Runners up in the league and runners up in the cup. But Liverpool then went on to win the league the following year, Nathan. A win then so early in the season against the Liverpool of that quality, and looking at that Liverpool side, that Ron Yates, Ian Callaghan, Roger Hunt, Ronnie Moran was playing, Jerry Byrne was there. Like, coming up from the second division, that must have been a hell of a confidence boost. Oh, it was unbelievable. Because when you come up, like when we promoted, actually, I was one of the few players, I think Big Jack had played in what was then the first division. I mean, the likes of Norman Hunter and Paul Reaney I don't know if Billy ever did. All young players, Norman Hunter, Terry Cooper, this was all new to them. I was one of the few, and I think I was only 23 when we got promotion. So it was a very, very young team, and to do what we did and get the start we did, which was great, Nathan, and we kept it going, was down to the fighting spirit that the Leeds had from with Don Reevy from day one. And as when we got better, the reason we got better, we got players in like Alan Clark and Mick Jones, and the players got older, obviously, and better as we went along. But always had a good spirit from day one, Nathan.
What was Don Reevy like on a day like that when you're going up against the champions, you're going up against Bill Shankly, he's going up against Bill Shankly? Was for a huge game like that, was he different in any way from a regular match? Not really. He demanded. He demanded. First of all, effort. That was his starting point, and a belief in the team, even though they were young players, to go out and have a go. So he used to be pretty nervous, Nathan, himself. He's a very superstitious man. Don, very superstitious. I mean, there was a rumour at the time that there was a curse on the ground, that the ground took over for some gypsies or something years and years ago, and he got some gypsies in to lift the curse. Yeah, well, listen, I'm from Mayo, so I know all about curses. You don't need to tell me.
14 years, Nathan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here, listen, Leeds may well go and beat Liverpool this weekend, but I don't think they're going to go on and challenge for the title regardless of how they do. But to have Leeds back, I think it's 15, 16 years. And just on Eddie Gray, because we touched on it with him on Tuesday night, he's Mr. Leeds United. He's been there as a player, as a manager. He's still there as an ambassador. It must have been particularly tough for him at that stage when he was sort of thrown in as caretaker manager, and he's the one who's there in charge in 2004 when they're relegated.
Yeah, well, it was an impossible task for Eddie. He just happened to be there at the time, Nathan. Like as you say, he's Mr. Leeds United. He's been there for a long, long time as a player, and he's still there doing a lot of work, and very, very popular lad, as you can imagine, around the club with the supporters, and been there for a long, long time. He does a great job generally. And he's, as you know, you met him or spoke to him. He's a great lad, Eddie.
Marcelo Bielsa confirmed finally today that he's going to stay on as manager for next season. He signed his contract. Any expectations for Leeds, or should it, even though the size of the club and people see them still as one of the big powers of English football, is it just about survival?
I would think so, Nathan. I mean, that's your starting point. Survive and then see how you go from there. I think they've made a couple of signings which they needed to do, because watching them playing last year, I watched them playing at Arsenal in the Cup, and for the first 45 minutes they were absolutely brilliant. Yeah. But they couldn't score, Nathan. I think that happened to them a lot. Like when you're on top of football, you have to be scoring, you have to be getting rewards for a good play. And I think that didn't happen to them. So hopefully, if they get somebody in that's going to score a goal, or they do score more goals, I think they'll be okay. From what I've seen, I think the attitude of the manager is good. He's not going to be playing, tight and defensively when he has an opportunity to attack. And I think that's what they'll do. And particularly at home, I would expect them to do well at home with the crowd behind them and that, Nathan.
They've obviously signed Rodrigo, the Spanish international, who they'll be hoping will be the one who'll get them the goals. In terms of the title race, we're only 6 weeks since the end of the last season, but it was a strange end for those top teams where we all knew Liverpool were going to go and win the league when football restarted. They bought a left back and that's it. Is that enough for Liverpool to kick on and win it again?
I think so, Nathan. It depends on their attitude, which I would be amazed if it isn't the same as it was last year. I think the dark horses next year could be Chelsea.
Right. You're impressed with the signings they've made?
Well, I don't know, though. I wouldn't be that familiar with them. But the fact is they've spent a lot of money, and you wouldn't expect them to be buying duds for the amount of money that they're paying, Nathan. And they have a good base as well. I think they have a good base at Chelsea this year. I think he did a good job with them. But if he gets the players in that he decides, well, I'm sure he has, that he wants, they could be the dark horses.
A lot of speculation today that N'Golo Kante might be on his way out. Inter Milan are in negotiations. I know he had injury problems last season and Lampard didn't seem to quite know how to use him. If you want to be winning the league, you would imagine a player of his experience and calibre is someone you want to keep around.
I'd be amazed, Nathan, if he's sold. I'd be absolutely amazed. I know he had a lot of injuries last year, but any game I saw him playing in, he was brilliant again.
Yeah.
These guys don't come along every 5 minutes. Somebody who's going to give you everything in every game they play. Just for examples alone, in the club, oh, no way. I think if I was selling any of the players at Liverpool, at Chelsea, he'd be the last one to go, Nathan. Definitely. I can't see that at all. I mean, if you're spending a lot of money to get players in, and you've got what I think he's still, like he had a lot of injuries last year, I think he's still the most valuable midfield player in the Premiership.
I know you've spoken before about when Leeds won the title and maybe not knowing how you were going to start the next season. What are you looking out for with Liverpool then in terms of attitude in these opening weeks that suggests to you that actually, they still have that desire there to go and win it back-to-back?
You know from the first match, Nathan, and I'd be surprised if I think Klopp is brilliant at in this particular situation, that he'll demand it. He'll say, forget about last year, it's gone, which it is, obviously. This is what I expect again. And he's got a big enough squad, you see, to change it round. Yeah. I know, like you're saying, he didn't buy, but he didn't need to buy. He's in a very lucky position.
You think those young players can step up?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I wouldn't have any doubts about them. Nathan, what we saw of them playing last season, when they played in the cup ties at Villa and one or two other places, they were excellent. You know, this wasn't just ordinary young lads. And don't forget, you only need two or three at a time at the most to come in with the big players. And I'd have no doubts about them whatsoever to step up to the mark.
All right, John, you're going with Liverpool for the title again. We shall see what happens and we'll talk to you again next Thursday night.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks a lot, John.
Bye-bye.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
See, what do you like? He's supposed to be famous for getting teams playing together and teamwork and fitness and all that. And he said, would there be an addition here? I said, we can't say no to anyone. And next minute, make one explode. It was you little stone, so you know everything. Now you're an expert on things. And Jack, the tears started running down Jack's cheek. You know what I mean? He was in fits of laughing.
The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33, live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
The all-new OTB Sports app. It's all videos, sports news, live scores, interviews, podcasts, all waiting for you. Search OTB Sports on your app store and download now.
Football is back.
Go to Sterling! Raheem Sterling!
Keep up to date with the latest scores on the OTB Sports app, live updates and analysis of Premier League action. The OTB Sports app, live score updates straight to your phone.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
It's 7:59. You're very welcome back to OTB AM. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. If you're just joining us, you've missed the best bits from John Giles on Thursday Night Football. It's Eoin and Adrian with you now for the next couple of hours. We're with you until 10 o'clock this morning, and it is a packed weekend of sport, and it is a packed show to reflect that. We've got a Premier League preview coming your way very shortly with Daniel Harris. We've got Alan Quinlan previewing the PRO14 final. We've got Colin Bowie on to preview the US Open finals. Andy Friend as well. We're going to make time for an interview with Andy Friend, the Connacht head coach, before we wrap up today. And also, because it's week one, people are probably more interested in Fantasy Premier League than they will be at any point throughout the next 38 weeks. Dave Moore of Today FM fame will be joining us to talk about his beautiful obsession with Fantasy Premier League. We'd love to hear from you at home today. You can give us a tweet at Off The Ball. If there are any opinions on any of those subjects you want to get in touch with, you can also comment on the YouTube stream. We'll go through those as the show develops. Adrian Barry, good morning.
Morning, Eoin.
I'm surprised to see that your house isn't decked out as the D Fortress this morning, considering you're not going to make it to the Aviva Stadium.
No, I'm not going to be one of the lucky 200. I do have switch over shoulders. Look, I mean, it's this. No, the other one, the opposite way. This one here challenges the idea of it being D Fortress, if I can get my finger positioned correctly to see what it is.
It's Munster against the All Blacks, of course.
Yeah. I picked that up a few weeks ago. It's absolutely beautiful. It's the programme from the famous game, obviously. I feel so strongly about the province owned that I went and even got it framed.
Is that a troll?
No, it's not. I appreciate why you might say that. I totally get that. But I saw it come up at auction, and I wouldn't say I'm like a crazy merch aficionado or like investor or anything like that, but definitely thought it was nice. Like, it's a great thing. It's. I mean, I'm saying this now because I bought the thing, but like, it is one of the most famous sporting occasions this country has ever seen. Certainly one of the most talked about on, and I would argue one of the most famous. And like, it's also aesthetically a beautiful thing. Like, look at how attractive it is to look at, and lots of lovely stuff inside. It's very much of its time. But also, bizarrely, came with a menu of what the All Blacks were eating that day. Somebody somewhere, the catering company, had taken a list of names and a list of everything that they were going to have to eat. Steak and chips was the main staple.
Right. I was just going to ask. So
post-match, I assume.
Post-match, right? So
I assume. I mean, I do. Who knows?
Yeah, but if it was pre-match, that might have been the secret. That could be the one piece of the lore that we haven't been told yet, that the steak actually did the All Blacks in that day. Does a PRO14 trophy get the blood flowing for a hardcore Leinster fan like yourself?
It's not going to be. It's not going to be hanging on the wall anytime soon, is it? It does, because of everything that's gone on over the last 6 months. There's no question about it. Like, it's like a league final to a Kerry man on that's still got something there. Something that tugs at the heartstrings. You know, my relationship with Leinster and the Pro14 and how great they tend to be in that tournament. Sometimes the greatest team of all time. But yeah, I think there's a case for Ulster this weekend. We're going to talk to Alan Quinlan about it a bit later on, but I think there's a case for Ulster this weekend. I think that when you look at, like, it's very difficult for any team to properly hit their straps, given that they've been away for 5 months. But I think, people I think have glossed over maybe in some regards the performances and the narrowness of some of the results over the last few weeks. Like the Munster game, which was the first game when they came back, there's like a 2-point win that everybody was saying afterwards Munster could have easily edged the other way. Like, suddenly people were talking about Munster being the great Munster comeback, and that Munster could very easily have edged that game. So you have that. You have the most impressive Leinster have been since they came back was the second team, giving Ulster a good one a couple of weeks back. But like, how many of those players that started that game are going to start this weekend? We'll find out a bit later today, but I would suggest not that many of them. And then you have the game that the head coach, Leinster head coach himself, described as brutal, which I'm assuming he meant in every regard, was the Munster game last weekend. And everybody's left that game saying, well, this Munster team are absolutely shocking. They're at I don't know, certainly not an all-time low, but they're at a very low ebb. And yet this greatest team of all time, we're supposedly told, only scored 13 points against them. So I think that there is reason to suggest that certainly this game is going to be closer than everybody suspects. Maybe you could argue it's the case that Leinster now suddenly have 3 games under the belt and they are going to hit their straps this weekend. But I do think that there's a case for Ulster.
Yeah, you've said the exact same thing that Ger was saying last week, that Munster stand a chance. And of course, come the end of the game, they probably did. But the yearning that is going on from Leinster fans throughout this resumption of rugby is nothing short of sickening. Johnny Sexton probably isn't going to start this weekend. Imagine if Manchester City had a big final and Sergio Aguero was fit and they decided to play Gabriel Jesus. If you were the team coming up against them, you would feel disrespected. And Ulster should feel disrespected in this case, that clearly Leinster are saying Saracens are better than you.
If they don't feel disrespected, they bloody should do. Like, they should make it up, right? Like, no point looking at a gift horse and like that. We Brian O'Driscoll on Wednesday night's show, and I put that point to him that before you dig into the rationale behind it, and maybe there is Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster and the coaching staff saying, like, Ross Byrne, we told you at the start of the season you're going to get big game time, and this is it. Like, maybe there is that, but it does amount to the same thing ultimately. It is Leinster saying we can beat you without our best 10. Yeah. And like, Ulster would be crazy to not slash that up on the dressing room wall.
Were you there that night, the Leinster-Ulster Champions Cup game last year? That was actually an incredible occasion, actually, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that when we have Alan on later on. But the amount of different things that happened in that game was mad, and that was just such a massive opportunity for this Ulster team to get one over Leinster. And there was no question that on that occasion Leinster were going like fully gung ho personnel wise. Not that like that's not going to be the case this weekend. It's only one positional shift, and of course Ross Byrne had a big part to play that night as well. I just think that you're right in what you're saying. Kind of, as much as you're trying to Yera away this weekend, I do think that styles make fights, and Ulster have more than a puncher's chance, as Dan McFarland put it this week.
Yeah, that was too much time spent with you on. That's where the yarring has come from. But I would have to add that we haven't mentioned Ulster really in terms of what they bring to the party, and really they've only played 10 minutes max of proper rugby, and that's the end of the Edinburgh game. They're beaten by Connacht, that Leinster game, and I left that Ulster game last week with about 20-25 minutes to go and thinking, sure, that's done, dusted and signed and sealed, and they put an unbelievable 10 minutes together and pulled it out of the fire. So there's lots of positives about that, but it is only 10 minutes of rugby.
Yeah, Arthur has reminded me here that Aguero was dropped for the 2019 FA Cup final, as well as Kevin De Bruyne, the one where they beat Watford 12-0, because of course, how did I not have that game and all the information from that particular 90 minutes at the top of my mind? Absolutely shameful. So just to correct that one, they're not comparable, Leinster and Manchester City. I take that back. Right, the Premier League is back this weekend. Live and exclusive commentary returns to Off the Ball this Sunday with 2 live games. West Brom against Leicester City is at 2 o'clock on Sunday. Stephen Doyle and Kenny Cunningham will be watching that. And then at 4:30, Brian Kerr will be alongside Nathan Murphy to watch Tottenham against Everton. Daniel Harris is with us to look ahead to the new season. How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Let's start with Liverpool, because a couple of days ago Jurgen Klopp had a bit of a pop off Frank Lampard, talking about the way that a team can't just change overnight, how Liverpool don't have a state or an oligarch funding them. And it definitely felt like there's a little bit of a beef brewing here between Jurgen Klopp and Frank Lampard. That's interesting, but it does feel to me that the subtext around these quotes are a legitimate concern or frustration about how Liverpool have done in this transfer window so far.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think, but obviously they had beef on the touchline towards the end of last season. But I think the first thing to say is it's sort of nice to see, in that when Klopp and Guardiola were competing, there wasn't a lot of needle between the two of them. And I found myself watching it thinking, I wish we had a prime Mourinho or a prime Fergie to stir this up a bit, because these guys are having it too easy and they're taking it too easy on each other. And the needle in the competition is enjoyable to watch, and it gives it a little bit extra. I think probably Klopp is slightly frustrated, because when you're the best, you need to continue investing. It's like, I remember hearing Marcus Trescothick, the cricketer, once saying that when he was in form, he practiced extra hard to make sure that he didn't waste it. And I think that's kind of the case with Liverpool, that they've proved themselves to be the best team in the country over the last season, but they haven't done very much about reinforcing that superiority, which means that other teams have the opportunity to catch up. Liverpool haven't really done the thing to get further ahead, other than they might hope for some organic improvement. But even that is not that likely, because they play a very physical style and there wasn't a long turnaround, and they don't have a very big squad, and they got lucky with injuries last season. But also that the other teams are signing better players, and Liverpool's players, probably the better players, apart from Trent Alexander-Arnold, the better players aren't getting better now. Virgil van Dijk, the player he is the player you see. Same with Sadio Mane, Mohamed Salah. Then probably not getting better in their late 20s. So that gives other teams scope to catch them up a little bit. And it also, we have to be very clear that the season that Liverpool produced last season is unprecedented, really, like what they did before lockdown. And so the likelihood of them producing another one of those is small, because they also had to win a lot of games by 1 goal to achieve that. And that kind of fortitude, it lasts, but it seems like it's unlikely to keep them going through another 38 games.
The injury point is an interesting one. I guess there is, of course, there's an element of luck when it comes to injury, because you're avoiding the freak injuries. I do think that there is a good injury profile in a lot of these Liverpool players, and it is part of the criteria that Jurgen Klopp looks at when he's signing a player. But I guess on the motivation element of things. Going back to defend a title is a more difficult thing because you're not going for your first one in 30 years. But what about the motivation to keep your place in the team? Like, the team picks itself for Liverpool. To get away from that, I would have thought, is a very important aspect of what Jurgen Klopp needed to do over the last couple of weeks. And he obviously hasn't had the financial weapons to be able to challenge that. Liverpool's stars are still relatively unchallenged in that starting 11.
Yeah, but I don't think we'll ever be accusing the Jurgen Klopp team of not being motivated enough. I just can't see it. Like, that's the genius of Klopp. Yeah. That he is able to manipulate and cajole these players to get not just the best out of them, but to get out of them in a lot of cases stuff that we didn't even know was there, and they might not even have known was there. And I think that, yeah, it is possible. I mean, I understand the mentality. Like, they did the big thing, and so doing it again to get ready to go again is hard. But I would be very surprised if we saw a Jurgen Klopp team failing in that regard. There might be other aspects in which they fail. It might be like Manchester City just have a much better season and get too many points. But I don't think that we'll be watching Liverpool saying they've not put it in today.
Over the last few years, we've seen Jurgen Klopp's style develop a little bit. Like, his pressing at Dortmund is different to the pressing at Liverpool. I mean, early days at Liverpool, there was more of a predication on counter-attacking, whereas now they're much more comfortable controlling a game. Do you expect a further development this season, given teams have figured them out a little bit more after the huge body of successful work last year?
I don't think it's so much about figuring them out, because I don't think, like, it's not that, like, the way Liverpool play to me is not that complicated. They get the ball out wide as quickly as possible. The fullbacks are high and wide, or they get it into Roberto Firmino as quickly as possible, and then they have two wide attackers who attack the box, and the balance is supplied by midfielders who run about a lot, mainly. But I think the signing of Thiago, if that happens, will give them a different dimension, because he is the kind of player that they've lacked. The question is whether they find a way of fitting him in to make it work, because what they have now does work. But it does feel, I mean, Thiago's not exactly a lockpicker. Like, he plays a bit deeper than that. And Klopp knew that they needed a lockpicker 2 summers ago, because he tried to sign Nabil Fekir. Like, he knew that the midfield lacked a bit of class. I guess he might be hoping that Minamino will deliver that, although he's been playing him out wide mainly. And he does also have Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who gives you something a little bit different in midfield. But what Thiago does is he allows a team to control the tempo of a game by ways other than just running the legs off the opposition and forcing them to play a quicker game than they're capable of physically, mentally and technically. What Thiago does is it's that intelligence and composure and passing that allows him to more dictate the pace of what's going on. And Liverpool, they don't have that. And if Liverpool are able to attract that and then incorporate it, that will give them a different way of playing, and I think will give them will be particularly helpful in Europe. So I think the thing for Liverpool is still that they lack a playmaker at number 10. I mean, they use Roberto Firmino as that, but it's not so much about him finding those little passes as they play off him. And they still look like they're going to lack that player who can produce that little bit of genius that unlocks a packed defence. Against most teams, it doesn't matter, because they have enough weapons to make sure that they get themselves wins anyhow. But Thiago will give them a better way of controlling the tempo, and I guess the person who makes the pass before the pass, so the actual pass rather than the pass before the pass, is easier and can be played earlier, because he has the vision to deliver the ball that enables that to happen.
Yeah, and like, who knows what a player like that or a position like that impacts in this Liverpool team, because like from what you're saying, it's almost as if there's like a hole or a deficit in that Liverpool team, which is very difficult to argue, because you mentioned there a bit earlier on about how difficult it is to back up the points total that they've had, how difficult it is to do that back to back. Well, they've done that already, so it's about sort of doing it again. Are you questioning whether Liverpool are actually going to get it done this season, Daniel, or is it a case again by how much?
What you're saying? Do I think Liverpool win the league? I'm not sure. I mean, I think it is obviously a two-horse race. I don't think that Chelsea have the defence to challenge. United haven't done the work so far in the areas that they needed to do the work to challenge. And even then, those two teams might well have needed an extra season to bed in the way that they want to play and to get the familiarity and the composure and to feel confident and comfortable with each other. I think that if City get themselves another defender, I would say that they're probably favourites. But at this point, it's really hard to say because we need to see them play. But I think a big advantage that City have over Liverpool is the squad size. There hasn't been a lot of turnaround. I mean, some players are still sort of playing last season because of the internationals that have been going on. So I think that is more of a problem for City than for Liverpool than for City, because City are able to rotate their front players and still get the job done. If I was betting, I guess I would probably bet on City, but it's a narrow one, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if Liverpool got it done again. But I think the thing with Liverpool is that they actually played better football, I thought, the season before when they didn't win the league than last season. Last season, they became extremely adept at getting over the line and just finding a way to win. And I'm not sure that could be enough for another season. I think they would need to get back to the level they played the season before last to match what I think City are going to do with a better defence.
Hey, just going back to Klopp's quotes, Daniel, talking about Chelsea having to get all these pieces to fit together pretty quickly. Is he right about that? Is he right about the fact that Chelsea are going to have a bit of an issue this season getting all these super signings together?
Maybe or maybe not. We don't really know who's going to play where and what Frank Lampard's plan is. And last season, ultimately, they lost a lot of games and they struggled to find goals when they needed them, I would say, Chelsea, and the goals that would offset the horrendous defending and goalkeeping. It may well be that sometimes happens that you put 2 or 3 new players into a team and they all gel. I mean, Liverpool spring to mind when in the summer of 1987 they signed Beardsley, Barnes and Aldridge, and I think they signed Houghton slightly later than that, and they put them into a team and they became, but for me, like until this Klopp team, the best Liverpool team that I'd ever seen, and it just worked. And sometimes it just works. With Chelsea, with the specific players that they've bought, I love Hakim Ziyech. I think he is a beautiful player. But he is a player that you could see struggling to adapt to the pace of the game in England because he's an artist. And English football isn't always conducive to artists, certainly in the beginning. I mean, if you look at someone like Robert Pires, who was an excellent player, it took him 3 or 4 months to understand what it took in English football for him to impose his artistry on that game. Juan Sebastian Veron's another one. I mean, slightly different with him because he was coming into a fully functioning midfield. But he wasn't the failure that people say he was at United, but he was better in the Champions League because the pace of the game suited him better. And it's possible that that could be the case for Ziyech. Werner, is he going to play on the wing? Is he going to play through the middle? Is a question that we don't really know the answer to. If he plays through the middle, you wonder about whether he has the physical presence to hold the ball up in the way that you need. Now, you look at someone like Sergio Aguero, who's dynamite in the box, and for him, that's enough. We don't know if Werner's a player of the quality of Aguero. What I've seen so far, I would say not. I think that Havertz, it's a matter of time. I think Havertz has a load of talent, and Chelsea knew that they had to buy Havertz this summer because he would go somewhere better next summer when more clubs had money. They got lucky, I think, that they had a free run at him. But yeah, like fitting them all together into a team is, as Klopp says, it's often difficult, but it's not always difficult. And I think Klopp is irritated that someone else has got more money than he has and that he's competing with nation states and oligarchs, which is an absolutely fair point. But you do also have to remember that Klopp is, I mean, he's a football manager. He only cares about his own team. And he's a hypocrite like they all are. When United signed Pogba, he was banging on about how he would never spend this amount of money on that kind of player. And it was obviously bollocks at the time. And then he obviously was allowed to buy Alisson and Van Dijk, and all of a sudden that wasn't the case anymore. And then Chelsea were allowed to spend loads of money, and it wasn't the case for Klopp, and now it's back being the case. So I wouldn't read too much into what Klopp says about the fairness of it all particularly. But at the same time, I think it's a fair point. I don't think that oligarchs and nation states should be allowed to be involved in football clubs and financing like this. But back to the original question, sometimes when you try and incorporate a lot of new players, it works, and sometimes it doesn't. I think that Chelsea will hand out some absolute kickings this season because there will be times when they get it right. I don't look at that team and see, I think that they're potential champions, though.
Yeah, it's exciting. They're a really, really exciting prospect, if nothing else, to watch over the next little while. In many ways, are Manchester United the antithesis to that idea of Chelsea getting together a team of Galacticos and us being unsure how well they're going to gel? Because we're pretty sure how cohesive Manchester United are, but conversely, they haven't signed very many players. And every time, like you look, any time a Manchester United player tweets, all the responses are sign someone, get someone into the club.
Every time I say anything, it's tell me about Sancho, tweet something about politics, tweet something about what I'm having for my lunch, any Sancho news. I think that United have, what I was saying about Liverpool and organic improvement, United and Arsenal and Chelsea have probably more room for organic improvement because, I guess, firstly because the players are just less good to begin with, and also the players are younger. So they've got more room to improve individually, and also they're not a settled, perfectly balanced side like Liverpool. So the more they play together, the more comfortable they will become playing together. I think what you saw with United was you saw that when they signed Bruno Fernandes, him being good was somehow used as a stick by some people with which to beat Solskjaer, as though that people were saying, well, actually, it's just all him. As though a manager identifying a problem and solving it in the best possible way was indicative of weak management, not good management. But I also think that people didn't understand that when they bought Bruno, he didn't just make everyone else better because he was good. What he did was he elevated the work that had already been done. So he was just another connection in the team that allowed the rest of the team to play well, because it wasn't like United hadn't played well before Bruno. They played really well and they won away at City in the league. They'd walloped Newcastle, they'd walloped Norwich, they'd walloped Chelsea, they'd won away at Chelsea twice. No, they won away at Chelsea once before Bruno, I think. So what he did was he raised the level of everyone else, but he raised the level of all the work that had already been done in making the team good. The main problem that United had last season was injuries. And when they took away Pogba for the whole season and Martial missed chunks of the autumn, they weren't as good because they didn't have any suitable replacements for those players, or they didn't have solutions within the first 11. Whereas now, let's say that Martial got an injury, now you could play Mason Greenwood at centre forward and play Daniel James on the right. Not as good, but something. If Pogba was injured or if Fernandes was injured, you've got Donny van de Beek. So you've got solutions for when the worst happens, because the worst happening for United is Bruno Fernandes getting injured. So I can see why the one deal that United have done is mitigating against that, like what happens if the worst happens. And also last season, when they played in the Europa League, they could afford to rest all the first team. Now they're in the Champions League, that isn't an option. So they're going to need to be rotating more than they did last season. So they still need more players for that reason. They need players for the first 11, and they also need players to bring in and not reduce the quality by any market sense in order to keep the players fresh.
I guess the frustration amongst many fans might be, where is our headline signing? Is there a deliberate attempt here almost that if you are going to sign somebody, it needs to be of Jadon Sancho's quality? Otherwise, we run the risk of upsetting the chemistry that is developing in this squad. And for whatever, 40, 50, 60 million pounds, that may not be worth that risk. Is that a deliberate strategy, do you feel?
I don't think that anyone particularly demanding a player of Jadon Sancho's fame or whatever, or value. It's just, I'm sure some children are, but it's just about Ole knows where the squad needs strengthening, and it's about bringing in players to make the team and the squad better. And it doesn't matter what their name is or what they cost. The United style that has defined all the great United teams, all of them, has been some homegrown players, a few expensive signings, and a few clever signings. And it doesn't matter who Ole buys as long as they're good. They don't have to be a huge name. They just have to be good at football and fit into the squad and fit into the team and fit into and satisfy the skill profile and the mentality profile that he wants to bring in. And as he said, I think he'd rather have a hole than an arsehole. So you don't want the wrong player, but at the same time, there are various right players who are available for United, and the question really is whether the board are going to give Ole the money. And at the moment, I guess if I was betting at the moment, I would say that I think that it might be Jadon Sancho and nothing else. But you can also see that what they're trying to do is they're trying to clear out a few players and it's probably who arrives is probably reliant on who leaves. And we saw that last season. They spent the whole summer arguing with Leicester over Harry Maguire, ended up paying what Leicester told them the price was, but also that deal didn't happen until the Lukaku to Inter deal was done. And so one was probably contingent upon the other. And I guess that might well be the case here as well. And I think that it's possible. It looks a lot like, I would like a better midfield player than Matic, Fred and McTominay. I don't think that is going to happen this summer. I think there's a chance of a left back and a possibility of a centre back maybe. But again, I think if it's Sancho, it might not be anyone else, or they might be waiting to see, as I said, to see who goes, or they might decide that actually they can't get a high quality centre back at the moment, so they're not going to just buy someone, but maybe they think they can get a high level left back, and although that's not more of a priority, if the quality of the player exists for that position, then perhaps they'll go for that. But you never really know, because it's very clear what the team and the squad need, but it's extremely unclear what the board are going to allow.
Just one last thing to finish up on, Daniel, and to go back to your piece at the weekend, last weekend, I guess talking about how uninteresting tactics are compared to the characteristics of managers and the narrative that we're going to see around so many clubs this year. That being said, does Marcelo Bielsa's arrival in the Premier League change that a little bit? I mean, there's going to be so many tactical analysis done tomorrow.
I didn't say it was uninteresting, and I didn't
less interesting than.
I didn't even say it wasn't important. I just said that in determining who wins stuff, talent and mentality are more important than tactics and coaching. I'm looking forward to watching Leeds like everyone is. I think Marcelo Bielsa is great, and he is an example of a manager whose strength is probably tactics, but there's a lot of motivation there as well. And ultimately, you're not going to get rubbish players playing Marcelo Bielsa's football. When he did it at Athletic Bilbao, he had excellent players. So I don't think it's not that tactics aren't important. It's just that ultimately, I was saying that it was about Ole Solskjaer. So I was saying that people are criticising him for not being good at coaching and tactics. And I kind of was saying that, first of all, I don't think that he's not attempting coaching or tactics. And here are some examples of coaching and tactics. But also, sometimes the best tactics and the best coaching involves just telling players to go out and express themselves and to allow them the freedom to take risks. Because who is to say that any manager knows more than elite level players about putting together elite level attacking moves? And knowing when to leave things alone is also coaching, and is also tactics, and is also management. Some managers are extremely proactive in telling their players what to do. Klopp and Guardiola are that for sure. But other extremely successful managers tend to allow that there'll always be a framework, like when the ball's here, someone should be there, or you should be there, but there is more freedom within that system. I think Guardiola's quite prescriptive, and other players allow a little bit more other managers allow a little bit more freedom. And I think that in the end, it will be usually the manager with the best players wins the league. And if you think about this, think about the players that Guardiola's had. Would Guardiola's football work with players other than that? Could you go to Liverpool and impose that style on Liverpool, his style on Liverpool's players? I think that would probably be quite difficult, because the way that Liverpool play is not the same as the way that City play, and that's the beauty of football. It's a perfect game. Add something in one area, you automatically take something away in another area. And that's why we see a lot of close games, and why goals are generally quite rare, because there's nothing that can't be countered. And there's also nothing really that hasn't been seen before, more or less. Everything is a variation, and innovation is variation, I think.
Okay, I was just going to ask if Bielsa was a more interesting strategist than pretty much anybody else in the Premier League this season. Are you looking forward to seeing his strategy in action is the question over the next little while?
Yeah, because the other thing about Bielsa is he's just an interesting personality to have around. He'll shake things up, and he brings an enthusiasm and a freshness and a zest, and that is not. His tactics reflect that, but like Klopp, it's housed in the individual. People love Bielsa, people revere Bielsa, and you don't revere technocrats. You revere personalities. You revere tricksters. People that are able to sweep you up in the beauty and the joy and the love of their personality. And that's a personal thing, and I think Bielsa has that, and Klopp has it, and I think Ole has it in a different way, and Fergie had it, and yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing what Bielsa brings to the Premier League tactically, but it seems to me to be a manifestation of the person that Bielsa is too. I mean, just that whole spying thing. I mean, amazing. Like more of that.
Yeah, 100%. Daniel Harris, great stuff. Enjoy the weekend football.
For the season. See you again.
Daniel Harris there on the line. Right, we are catching up with Connacht head coach Andy Friend next, and Alan Quinlan will be with us before 9 o'clock. So if you've got any questions ahead of the PRO14 final, get them in now.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
All right, delighted to say we're joined on the line by Andy Friend. Andy, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks, mate. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks a million for taking the time to have a chat to us. I don't know if it's at what sort of a time of the season, the very odd season it is for you. Is it a quiet time? Are you in review, or what's going on?
No, we're now officially out of the last season, which is a good thing, which means we can look forward rather than staying what was, as you said there before, a pretty tricky season. So after the Munster game, we gave the boys and the staff a week off. We've come back. We've had this week now, where we're preparing for we've got 2 A-game fixtures coming up. The first one on the 19th of September and the next one on the 26th of September, which should then launch us into the new season, which we're still waiting to find out exactly how that's going to play out.
Yeah, so it's just a week off. That's? I mean, I know we've all had an extended period of time that we didn't wish to have off, that we have had off, but is that the way it's working?
Well, this week's not. So last week was. We gave the boys last week that week off. So just a down week. I mean, it was really weird. Like, it felt like we had probably 4 months off, but we didn't. You were working the whole time. Players were doing their own, our programs and skilled programs, all the rest of it. So we weren't actually in the building, but we were constantly working and keeping busy. So we had that build up into the 2 Interpro games, the game against Ulster, the game against Munster, and yeah, just to have a week where we weren't required to be in the office and we could actually get outside of Galway was good. So I think most people took that opportunity and have come back really fresh and ready to go for the new season.
Did you actually get outside of County Galway? I've seen some of your tweets. You were out camping. Yeah,
we didn't get outside of County Galway. No, we love it here, mate. The Connemara is a pretty special spot. So during lockdown, we bought a tent, hoping that when we heard about social distancing, I just said to my wife, we'll go and plonk ourselves on a hill somewhere. But by the time the tent arrived, because we had to get it online, they'd brought in the 2 kilometre ruling. You weren't allowed away from your home more than 2K. So that's why we camped outside for the first little bit. But as the restrictions have eased and we've been able to move around the county, we had a magic 3 days out in Clifton in Clatterduff at the EK campground there. It was just brilliant. So if we get any more weekends, I'll be out that way.
And hopefully plenty more. Now that you've got the tent and it's all set up, I've been through that heartache myself over the last couple of months. It's good to get past it. Can I talk to you just about the end of the season then, Andy? Because it was a mad end in so many ways. Like on the pitch, obviously, results didn't all go your way, particularly with the last game. But off it, obviously, it was a crazy end. Like off it with the Heineken Cup expansion. I wondered what the top lines of the Andy Friend report into that season gone by will be when you're reporting back.
Yeah, I mean, we were, as you know, it was a crazy year. We had we fell in, we started okay, and then we fell into a bit of a hole in around the Christmas period. We had a lot of injury. We played our Heineken Cup fixtures, and Toulouse away, we went close, didn't get there. Had the win against Montpellier, had the win against Gloucester at home, and then had another Interpro batch over Christmas time where we actually were well beaten by all 3. Well, certainly Leinster and Ulster were well beaten by those teams, but we were climbing. I felt we were climbing out of that hole, and we were really looking forward to the tail end of the season and trying to push for a top 3 spot. I mean, our goal at the start of the year was to get a home quarter final in the PRO14, and I honestly felt like we were on track. The week COVID pulled up, pulled us up. We were about to play the Scarlets. That was a really important game for us. Felt like we were coming in some form there. We'd had a good win against Cardiff a couple of weeks prior to that, and the Kings. So we were ready to sort of, have this final hurrah into the season, but it all sort of pulled up. So to then come into the last two games knowing that mathematically we still could win, but we needed everything to go our way. We didn't really talk about that as a group. We just talked about a performance, just given all the work that had happened during the COVID period. Everyone had worked really hard to build their bodies, make themselves better in whatever way it was that they needed to. We just wanted to be able to show that. And I felt like we did that really, really well in that Ulster performance. I was really, really proud of that performance. What we didn't do was then be able to back it up against Munster the following week, which was frustrating. So, there was good and bad. But we can now say that season's parked. We've managed to get ourselves back into Champions Cup rugby, which is really good. And now we're just waiting to see what the pro rugby season is going to look like and get stuck into that as quickly as we can.
How much was the Ulster performance, Andy, almost a product of everything you've done over the last few years? It felt like such a fluid performance, a really exciting brand of rugby that any neutral, I think, would have been extremely impressed by coming to that game. Like, despite the fact that it's your first game back, it does feel like it was the accumulation of a few years of work.
Yeah, it was. And a few years of work in the last two, but also for everyone else that's gone before my time here, there's been a lot of work going on. And as we all know, the Pat Lam era produced a win for Connacht Rugby in the Pro-12. There were then 2 years that probably weren't as fluid as it needed to be. But over the last couple of years, we have been trying to make some adjustments to our game style as well as our squad. So what I was really pleased with, in the last two seasons, we've moved on 23 players. That's a lot of players to move on in 2 seasons. And some of those players left on their own choice. Some of it was our choice. But to bring in the new, 20, 25 new players, which is what we've got, and to see some of those young men, the way they're playing, the way they're pushing the older blokes who've been there before them, and just there's genuine competition in those positions now. And I think that's, knowing that no one's got a position that's safe, as well as all the development that's gone on physically, mentally, with their craft, that produced that performance against Ulster, which is the style of footy we want to be playing. If we can do that week in, week out, we will. So it was exciting to see that.
You mentioned the Munster game, Andy, as well, and wrapping it up. And I'm sure as a last game of the season, there's so many reasons that you would want, I'm sure, to have played again the following week. And there's been a lot made about the discipline in that game, and I know you've spoken about it yourself. Like, I suppose there's always a rush to make a whole pile of assumptions about our conclusions from the game, given the discipline was so poor. But overall, I think I've seen Connacht were like maybe 8th of the 14 teams in the disciplined league generally. So it's obviously not a massive issue for you, but at the same time, how do you go about addressing that then with the players afterwards? What's the protocol around that, or how do you tackle it front on, or how do you address it with the players? Yeah,
we do tackle it front on. I mean, we had it my first year, the first season. I think the opening game of the season was against Glasgow, 17 penalties against us. The next week we went away to Edinburgh, 18 penalties against us. The following week, Zebre, 16 penalties against us. And we said, fellas, we can't survive. We can't play an opposition and a referee. You can't do it. So we introduced what we called a red penalty board. So if you gave away just a brainless penalty, a dumb penalty, you're offside, for example, your high tackle, something that you can definitely control, we called it a red penalty. And we aim to have 4 red penalties max in a game. If you gave away a penalty where there was you can sort of see what you were doing, but you can also see, and this is the way rugby is, that it can be quite ambiguous at times, but you could see what you were trying to do. You could see what the referee was seeing as well. You'd say, okay, well, we'll call that an amber penalty. So we know we're going to get 2 or 3 of those in a game, but that's okay. And then a green penalty was, well, I just think the referee's got that one wrong. When we looked at all those penalties, we were up around the 8 or 9 red penalties per game. So we put a real focus on pretty much a name and shame. Let's not do it. Let's not have them. And if you do, you commit the crime, your name's going to come up. You don't want your name on that red penalty board. We went from being the most penalised team in the competition. This is in 2018-19 to the least penalised team in the competition, because we had a focus on that. We went away from that probably certainly in the last season. We felt that our discipline had got really good again, hence the reason we're sort of sitting mid-table, albeit those last couple of games weren't so good. So the players have actually come back and said, can we bring back the red penalty board? So, they're owning that. I think it's one of the things we try and do there at Connacht. We have the real conversations. If we're doing something well, we'll talk about it. If we're not doing something well, we'll talk about it. So everyone's very aware of that's an area we need to tighten up, and I know we're going to get better.
Is the red penalty board a physical presence in the Connacht dressing room in and around the Connacht training facility?
It would be what we do there with that. We'd put it up every Monday morning.
Right.
So, and it'd be an ongoing tally. The other thing that we've actually been working, I believe, has given us some, or will give us some real advantage too. We've been working with the Irish referees. So we've had George Clancy come in over the last 3 weeks, do some work with us. We've had Joy Neville comes in tomorrow. Andy Brace comes in next week. So Dudley Phillips and his referee group have been fantastic for us, and we've got a real appetite to work with the referees. My view is coaches, referees, players, we're all trying to get the right product. And the more we can understand what they're seeing, they can understand what we're seeing and doing, and the players are saying, we'll get the best product for us to play and coach and for spectators to watch. So I think it's really important that those three groups continue to work together.
How did the players respond to a name and shame process?
Yeah, well, they've asked for it back. So I think they want it. I think, they want the pressure on themselves to say, let's not do that. So again, I'm pleased that they want it. Some players could run away from that sort of stuff. These blokes tend to want to own it, so it's good.
Yeah, I'm sure as with any group, there's a few people who are quietly or maybe more meekly putting their hand up for it than others. Did you find, and feel free to name names here, did you find that there were certain parties who were generally top of that board, or was it like an overall cultural thing that you kind of needed to, that there was a spread of it and you needed to tackle it generally?
No, what you found was certainly in the first year there was a cluster of players, and you were always guaranteed to get one or two. Now some of it is positional, but there's other ones there. I mean that's human nature too. If a player's given away 3 penalties in the last 3 games, they're on the referee's radar. So it's a bit like the bloke that misses the tackle. You miss the first tackle of the season and you play number 10. Guess what's happening? You're going to have to tackle a lot because people are going to come down that channel. So the whole thing is don't give a referee a reason to be looking for you. And once we identified that with players and said, well, listen, you're going to have to adjust. It's not for the referee to make adjustment. We've got to adjust, whether it's the way we maul, whether it's the way we scrummage, whether it's our offside line, whatever it is, tackle or roll away. We have to read the trends that are happening there and make the adjustment. Otherwise, we're going to keep getting nabbed. And I believe we did that. So I'm not afraid that we won't be able to do that again. I know we will be able to do it again. And I think everyone's trying to adapt to the new interpretation of the laws. I had some frustrations coming out of that last game, which I shared. We'll wait and see how things develop over the new season.
You're heading into your 3rd year now, Andy, and I'm sure from a obviously planning point of view, the last 6 months have probably hindered, I'm sure, the general grand plan. But if I could ask it this way, what, if you had a magic wand down there now and you could say, listen, there's one thing that I need to change or a couple of things that I need to shift to move the Andy Friend grand plan now onto the next stage with Connacht Rugby, what would those things be?
Well, I think the things that are already in place, it does take time to build, but I think some of the squad composition, we have been adjusting, as I said, 23 players in 2 years, which is significant. I think one of the other big things, for us to get that performance in the European Cup, in the Heineken Cup games, we've never made a quarterfinal knockout stage. We need to do that in order to prove to ourselves that, listen, we are worthy here. We've had good performances, but we need to be able to do good performance into a good performance to get ourselves into a quarterfinal. So that, for me, would be a massive boost for the province to know that we do belong in that group. And probably the last thing, which is all around the new stadium and our new facilities when they do come, I do think our training facilities linked into the stadium to give our supporters a better place to come and watch rugby, and for us as a group to train. You know, the wind and the rain doesn't stop here in Galway, so you need to have an area where you can go indoors and you can still get your work done. So I know that will be, and when it will still happen, it will be a great boost for the province.
It's interesting talking about that actually when we talk about infrastructure, because it seems that the project going on in Connacht is a really positive one. At the same time, you can look at new facilities, you can look at infrastructure and say that is the be all and end all. It is what you do with that at the end of the day. If the coaching is right and if the I guess the money being pumped into the right people is there as well.
Yeah, and I don't think the facilities we got are bad. I just think we could make them better, which would assist us in being better. You know, and I think that's important. I know a lot of people, you know, they'll look at our facilities compared to other people's facilities and say, how do you blokes function? Well, don't worry about the facilities. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. And how we do it, I think Connacht have got a brilliant way of finding a way to get a job done. Whether that's just the west of Ireland, I don't know, but it's certainly evident in everyone that I see that's either worked here or lives here. They just get a job done. So the rain doesn't bother me. Otherwise I wouldn't still be here. The rain and the wind doesn't bother me. But I do know the brand of footy that we want to play, it can definitely hinder that. That's why, you know, we have a lot of success at the sports ground, because people don't like turning up there. It's not what they're used to. We don't have the plush change room facilities. We don't have the, you know, you got to walk across the dog track to get out to the ground. Now we don't have the doggy do on the field anymore, which is good. That's been sorted out, but it's different. People don't like it. And you got wind and rain, and you got the Connacht clan sitting there singing the Fields of Athenry, making life difficult for people. So that's what I love about this place. I love the uniqueness of it. So I don't ever want to lose that. But at the same time, I think some of our, I know when we do build a new stadium, the facilities will be better, and it will just add to the way we prepare and therefore what we deliver on the field.
I'm sure you're not spending a huge amount of time, Andy, looking at the other provinces and what they're doing. But at the same time, when you look at Munster bringing in a couple of World Cup winners to strengthen there, you look at it looks like an endless conveyor belt almost of like an embarrassment of riches at Leinster in so many ways. Ulster bringing in players with like big international experience. There must be quiet moments where you're looking at that and going, I mean, how can we compete with these guys?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's situation's different, isn't it? And you can look at that a couple of ways. You can look at it and say, I wish I had that. Or you can look at it and say, well, we don't have that. How can we compete? And I think one of the things we do really well at Connacht is we find a way, again, without some of the things that other provinces have, we still find a way to compete. We've got to do things differently. You know, we've spent a lot of time during that COVID period on looking at the way we train. So not what we do, but how we do it. And can we make that better? How can we squeeze out every little drop out of the current staff and the playing group that we've got, and how can we be better? So, you know, we've looked at three big pillars there: our craft, our body, and our mind. So we do a lot of work on our craft. We have a great set of coaches who, the way we analyse games, the way we analyse what it is that we're doing within games, the way we put a program together for the players, linked in with the players, I think is the best I've ever worked with. We've then got the body part of that, which is a brilliant medical team, a brilliant athletic performance team, nutritionists that work on the body and work with the players to get the body the best it can be. And we saw some incredible gains during that COVID period. Players that needed to lose weight, they lost good weight. But players that needed, or they lost weight, players that need to put on weight, they put on really good weight, lean muscle mass. Niall Murray putting on 6-7 kilos of lean muscle mass during the COVID period. Phenomenal gain for that young bloke. But other ones too. Paul Ball put on good size. Connor Fitz put on good size. You know, some really good gains. Bundy Arkey came back 7 kilos heavier, looking, you know, just really worked hard on his body. So the body, a lot of work going on there with that. And then the new part of it is the mind. So we've just brought a new bloke in, Jack Birtwistle, to work with the players on maximising your performance on game day. And I don't believe that's been done anywhere else. So we can't do the things that other provinces do. So we've got to be a little bit smarter, I believe, and we've got to try and work around trying to find an edge that's going to get us an advantage with that. So we spend a lot of time on leadership, on autonomy, on players taking responsibility for their own actions, and now starting to work with a wellbeing piece through Aidan O'Flynn and with Jack Birtwistle and Deirdre Lyons on the mind for the player and making sure that we got the best product with that. So it is different, but I think that's how we survive it, and how I think we can still win. I do believe we can still win if we can be better at getting those three pillars right. There's no reason why we can't win.
Have you worked with many mind coaches before in terms of getting the mental preparation right for match day, and how is this current relationship working between you and him and the players?
I haven't worked with many before because it actually hasn't been something very prevalent in rugby. It's prevalent in other sports now, but again, it's been probably over the last 4 or 5 years that you've seen more talk of the mental skills. And I think as soon as people think of mental skills, they think of imagery or they think of meditation, that sort of stuff. It's very different to that too. That's it's quite specialised. You might get into some visualisation stuff or some meditation stuff if you choose to. This is more just around what is your emotional state, or really a self-awareness thing. What is your emotional state? When you've played your best game of rugby, how did you feel leading up to that? Do people know? Most people will go, geez, I can't remember. Oh, actually, I sort of remember that. Okay, how'd you get yourself to that state? Yeah, I'm not really sure. Well, every weekend we're about to play, but a major part of that is how you feel as you walk in there. Are you calm? Are you clear? Are you confident with what you're doing? Don't know. But if you don't know how to get yourself to there, well, how can you produce that on a game day? So it's a major area of the game, which, I've been doing a lot of reading on it, and I've got my own thoughts on it, have had for some time. But now to have a bloke like Jack come in and be able to work with the players with this, I think it's going to be really powerful for us. Time will tell, but, he's only new in the door, but I'm trying not to put too much pressure on the bloke. But I just know there's an appetite, and that's probably the other thing. We said to the players, those that want it, it's there for you. And certainly the interest from the players to date has been really, really positive.
When you say you've been doing reading in that area, has the last couple of weeks and months confirmed what you've been reading? Has it totally opened your eyes, or how has it worked?
Yeah, it has. And I reckon, everyone's COVID period's been different. And I think you've got to be careful by saying COVID was a great time. It wasn't a great time for a lot of people, and it still is a very awkward time and a really unpleasant time, because there's been a lot of sadness during this period too. For me personally, though, we couldn't get home to Australia to see our boys and to see my parents and Kerry's parents, and we couldn't control that. What we could control is when we were here, how could we spend our time? So we spent the time. For Kerry and I spent a lot of time together, but for me personally, just really, really going to town with trying to upskill myself as much as I could in a whole range of different areas, and one of those was in the mental skills stuff. Got connected with a guy called Aaron Walsh at the Chiefs, at the Waikato Chiefs, who shared a lot of good stuff with us. Got a lot of different Zoom calls with different people. Talking to Dave Hatfields, talking to John Cooner, who's been working with us here too, with Connacht Rugby, and just dial in with different people around leadership, around mental skills, around personal ownership and performance, and use that time really, really, I believe, really, really wisely to try and better myself in that area. So that time definitely gave me time to spend on that area, as well as a few other areas, and I feel much more confident with my belief as to the way forward coming out of that.
So Leinster and the Crusaders weren't the only ones sharing ideas?
Oh no, they're the ones everyone's talking about them, because they're two pretty big teams, aren't they? No, there's a lot of I know our coaching staff. Jimmy Duffy was linked onto a whole heap of different Zoom calls. Pete Wilkins was dialing into all sorts of. Wasn't all rugby either. It was some football teams. Our analysts were doing the same. Nigel Cullen was doing that. So we had a really broad range of people that we were trying to connect with and upskill ourselves with. So the time was spent really wisely. On top of that, we were dialing back into each other and challenging all the things that we've been doing, which I think has been a real plus too, because it was a great reset button for us all. You stop, and it gave us time to look at what we were doing and could we be better. And how can we be better if we're going to get to where we want to get to, which is winning titles and being in knockout stages of Heineken Cup? How can we get there? It's not just going to happen. So there was a lot of time spent reflecting and trying to challenge ourselves on that.
Yep. All right, Andy. Listen, fascinating stuff as always. Really good to pick through all those various aspects with you over the last little while. Thanks, Millie, for taking the time. Good luck for the. Bizarrely, it feels so weird saying this because the season is just finished, but best of luck with everything for the new season.
Cheers, man. Appreciate that.
OTB AM.
8:54 a.m. You've just been listening to Andy Friend in conversation with Adrian and myself. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We are sticking with rugby. PRO14 final tomorrow. Leinster against Ulster. Alan Quinlan is with us. How are you, Alan?
Good on. Now, and yourself?
All good. Let's get straight into this. The Leinster team is expected to go with Ross Byrne instead of Johnny Sexton at out half. How disrespected would you feel if you were Ulster reading that team news that they're picking Sexton for Saracens rather than for the final this weekend?
I don't think you'd be disrespected because they've done it before, and I think there's realisation that he's an international player as well. Obviously, there's a difference between him and Johnny Sexton and what they've achieved and the ages of the players. If this was a one-off scenario that hadn't happened before, but Leinster have shown they've done this before in semi-finals and finals and in Europe in the last couple of seasons, and it's worked for them. So I don't think you'd be disrespected, and it gives a little ray of light, if you like, and that's been respectful to Ross Byrne because Sexton just really makes Leinster tick and puts them on the front foot and is so dominant and a big leader for them. But sometimes I've thought about this before. Does it make Leinster weaker and a little bit more vulnerable? I think they did it against Munster in the last couple of semi-finals last year, the year before, and it's he's just done a fantastic job. Ross Byrne, he's fearless and he's transitioned into the team and he seems to be able to deal with the pressure of these big games. So it gives a ray of hope that they're not going to be as good with Sexton on the field, but Ross Byrne has done a fantastic job.
It seems that technically there isn't a huge drop-off when you get to Ross Byrne on the pitch. It's more to do with the leadership qualities that Sexton brings and, I guess, the decision-making on the pitch.
His kicking game is probably smarter, I think, and he takes the ball to the line. Sexton probably that little bit more aggressively and has that more confidence to be really dominant. Ross Byrne probably stays a little bit deeper, and that's part of his development is having the confidence to really run with the ball because he is a big guy. And Sexton probably has that more belief in himself to do that and probably more dominance with players around him. But Ross Byrne has been, very calm and assured in his performances. He's kicking at goals has been spot on as well for him. So he'll transition into the team and he'll be very calm. I like his composure and, so he's not a guy who's going to panic. And you'll probably see there won't be any difference in the intensity of their performance or the execution of it.
Quinny, you said it yourself when you were on with the lads earlier in the week that Leinster weren't great against Munster, and they weren't great against Munster either day. And I suppose most of the conversation post last weekend has been focused on Munster. But Leinster weren't great either day. In fact, the best performance they've had since they came back was the second, effectively, against Ulster a couple of weeks ago. So, there is a case for Ulster here this weekend, isn't there?
There is a case, but it's not a very strong case, Adrian. I think they can look back on the European game last year when they ran Leinster very close and probably should have won that game. And you probably get that once out of 10 when someone plays Leinster in a big game, unless you're Saracens or maybe Racing or someone like that, where we expect it to be a lot closer. We probably expect Munster to be closer at times in the last couple of seasons, but Ulster will look back at that game and say, look, we've been down there before, and that can be dangerous in a way because it can take away that fear that if you don't play well against Leinster and if your emotion isn't through the roof and your intensity that you're going to get walloped. But everybody expects this to be a one-sided affair and for Leinster to win. So Dan McFarland is right when he says they've got a puncher's chance. They've got to land a few knockout blows and that's important how they start the game. And if they stay in the game, then, well, you never know. They're a side who do throw caution to the wind a little bit. They have some game breakers. They have some individual brilliance that can change a game. And, if they ask questions of Leinster, who knows? But the reality is I don't think they're strong enough to win the game. I could be wrong. But looking back in that game, they've been there. They'll have regrets from that. They'll know the level that's required. I think they'll know that you've got to bring a real intensity and aggressiveness. And, for the last 20 minutes last week against Edinburgh, they can take a lot of confidence out of that. It's a real character builder, that one, because the previous couple of weeks, Ulster weren't good. They were porous and soft a little bit against Connacht in that first game, and well beaten by Leinster's second string in the second game. So they need their big players. Coetzee was fantastic last week for him. If they can follow him and some players can have big games and back him up. Stuart McCluskey can be very effective with him. Rob Little, get him the ball. And I think, they have a chance. There's no doubt about that, and they'll believe it themselves. But ultimately, they've got to have a top-class performance to upset the odds here.
When you say they're not strong enough, where is the weakness?
Well, again, it's a little bit like I mentioned about the Munster's front five last week. You've got to get a platform against Leinster, and Rob Herring against Ronan Kelleher. That's a really interesting one because Andy Farrell will be watching that closely, who will start for Ireland in the autumn. They're two internationals. Does Dan McFarlane go with Eric O'Sullivan and Tom O'Toole this week over Jack McGrath and Marty Moore? Alan O'Connor, I thought he was fantastic last week. He's aggression, he's honesty, he's work rate, but he's not an international. Sam Carter has been a little bit disappointing for me. You sign an Australian international. I think his impact hasn't been what you'd like from an overseas player when you bring him in. We've had this debate so many times. When you bring in overseas guys, they've got to be better than players you already have, and they've got to make a real impact. Unless they're the project players, which we've seen happen a lot in the last number of years. He's an Australian international. So I look at the front five and I think, can they get the better of Leinster? And that's where the question marks are for me. They've become harder, if you like, in the last couple of years, Ulster. And one of their biggest issues was not their backline, but their ball carrying ability up front. And who's going to step up with Coetzee? Is Eric O'Sullivan going to make carries? Tom O'Toole, Herring, Carter and Alan O'Connor, are they going to be, aggressive with Fardy and Toner, or maybe James Ryan? Are they going to make an impact themselves and impose themselves? So it's a front five situation again for me. I think if Ulster get enough of quality ball, they have guys. James Hume is a very, very exciting player. Rob Little. If they get enough of ball, they can be very, very dangerous. And they're the question marks for me up front.
That seems to be what it comes down to. In the Irish Times this morning, Gavin Comiskey is quoting from Rory Best's book saying how Dan McFarland put a premium on time between ball carry and ball availability, that there was a limit of 2 seconds between those two things happening in training, and there was a countdown timer essentially in training for that thing. That seems that very much applies to your game plan against Leinster. If you don't get that quick ball at ruck time, you don't have a chance against Leinster. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, if you get, obviously every team will try and generate quick ball because it takes a little bit longer for defences to set. It's very well doing it in training. Yeah. It's different in a match when you play against a side as good as Leinster. That has to be your ambition. I think quick ball, you can ask questions of defence, and they find it much more difficult to get set. The defensive coach in any team wants you to slow down the ball, because then you can get your defence set and you can be dominant, get off the line and really turn a defence into attack by putting pressure on the opposition. So they're very ambitious, and I think I like Dan McFarlane. I think he's very astute. He's a good reader of the game, and that having that ambition to generate quick ball. And if they do generate quick ball, well, then they can ask questions, and they have the ability to cause problems out wide for Leinster. But I can't see Leinster allowing that to happen. Leinster have been very, very dominant in defence. In their last 24 matches, I think they only conceded around 40 tries in this remarkable run. They're going for 25 consecutive wins, and they've only conceded 40 tries. So they average 1.66 tries per game. It's really interesting, and only one team has got in those 24 wins, since they lost the Saracens last year in the Champions Cup final, they have 24 wins on the trot. And only one team has got a bonus point against them, a try bonus point. And that was Ulster before Christmas. They scored 6 tries, but they still lost the game 54-42. So I just thought that was really interesting. It kind of jumped out at me this morning that they're the only team who scored 4 or more tries against Leinster. So they don't concede a lot of scores. They only average 1.66 a game. So that tells its own story about how good they are without the ball and how good they are with the ball. When, you know, they're averaging, I think they average 4.45 tries per game. So they score a lot of tries and don't concede a lot of tries. That's what makes them so good. And it's the quality of player they have. So at the end of the day, I think Ulster can cause them problems, but it comes down to what happens up front. And, you know, Jordy Murphy, Matthew Ray, Marcel Coetzee, they need big games. Their second rows need to really impose themselves and how they deliver that ball to their backline.
And Quinny, we were actually having a similar conversation in relation to the football a bit earlier about the value of tactics versus like motivation or mentality or whatever. And I know that like we spent the last couple of years talking about the diluting of the personality of provinces by bringing in players from other provinces. But having said all of that, if you're Dan McFarland, do you not try to just get every Leinster player available on the pitch this weekend? And I mean, that provides all the motivation they need, surely.
Yeah, it's a very good point. You put Jack McGrath, Marty Moore there, Jordy Murphy, and Madigan. They have a point to prove. Yeah, Madigan, they have a point to prove. I think it's a little bit more difficult with Madigan because that pivotal position at 10, Billy Burns, has been really good for Ulster. Do you start him after getting the conversion and the penalty last week? I'm not sure. Having Madigan come off the bench maybe gives that a little bit of spark as well, enthusiasm and quality as well, and a real determination if they are kind of chasing the game, which they possibly could be. If Ulster get themselves in front, well, they're the ones that can build and grow a little bit of confidence, but they've got to keep playing. But there is a big argument for Jack McGrath and Marty Moore. I think Jordy Murphy will start. Sean Reedy was good when he came off the bench last week, and those decisions that Dan McFarland were big decisions to take, to bring Matheson on and Reedy last week. I think they were massive decisions. Matheson looks like he may start ahead of Cooney. I think he had a big impact last week. So yeah, there's definitely an argument to start these guys, but you know, he's got to get the balance right and see, you know, will they be needed to bring on that impact and make an impression. Jack McGrath, it's just funny. I think 2.5, 3 years ago, he's down in New Zealand coming off the bench for the Lions in the 3 tests and putting massive pressure on Mako Vunipola to start. And I just think it's amazing the way that, you know, he's kind of fallen off his performances, that level of performance. I think his confidence is probably shot a little bit, and I still think he can turn it on, and I still think he's a top quality player. He'd be the probably one I'd say, this is your opportunity to show Leinster why they let you go effectively. I think it's a little bit different from Marty Moore. He was kind of on the fringes.
Why they shouldn't have let you go.
Wasn't started. Pardon?
Show them why they shouldn't have let you go.
Yeah, probably. I don't think he would have wanted to leave Leinster at the time. Or would have been frustrated and disappointed. But look, it is what it is. That's sport. Things can change quickly like that. But
we'll see what pans out.
McFarland will do. Yeah.
And even Andy Farrell was an interesting one you mentioned about John Cooney as well. And like on that point, and to move on the conversation slightly, just in the last couple of minutes that we have, Quinny, I know you'd spoken to the lads at length about Munster at the weekend, but just one thing that we wanted to go back on that had been developing over the course of the week that had been mentioned by Gordon Darcy, it had been mentioned with Brian O'Driscoll on Wednesday night, and he was talking about it as well, the lack of on-field leadership specifically. So when the box kicks are happening, that nobody on the pitch is willing to tackle the head coach by saying, actually, hang on a second here, we need to stop doing this, or the lack of leadership to take that on. And maybe, you know, we talk about scrum halves, and Andy Farrell must be pulling his hair out at the minute, wondering where his starting scrum half is going to come from for the games upcoming. But a lack of on-field leadership, specifically in relation to that Munster group, is like a credible thing to be saying about Munster at all. But do you go with that? And who are those players that need to stand up for Munster?
I can't believe we're going back on Munster again. But anyway, we have to, I suppose. And I listened to Drico and I thought it was very interesting. I was in dressing rooms with him over the years, and himself, Rog, Paul O'Connell. I would have seen them challenging all the different coaches, not just the manager, about, you know, particularly in video sessions, if something didn't go right that the coach wanted to implement, and if the coach didn't back the players over something they wanted to do in a game, like different backline moves, kick the ball more, whatever the case may be, you know, you'd have a Monday morning session then where this would come up and it'd be a real debate, and they'd try and address it, and there'd be a bit of honesty about what's happened. You're talking about on-field leadership. I think it has to come from your 8, your 9, your 10. You know, the level of experience. Maybe you could have a full-back, someone like Rob Kearney, if he's playing for Leinster in the last number of years, or Ireland, would have a big voice in the dressing room. You know, the hooker about what way he wants his forwards to approach line-out, stuff like that. So invariably you'll have 4 or 5 leaders who you want to challenge as a coach, and that seems to be a bit of an issue because, look, it's easy watch on TV or watch up in the stand and say, well, that's the wrong option, that's the wrong option, that's the wrong option. It's difficult sometimes when you're out on the field, and that's the real key to leadership on the go, where you see something that's not working. You might have identified space or weakness in the opposition and a certain way that you're going to keep hammering away at them. And then you go out in the field and it's not working. Like the vulnerability maybe that Jordan Larmour had last week, that Munster continued to keep going with the box kicks. And then the opposition tied him up and catched him. And then where do you go to from there? You've got to make on-field decisions. And I think Conor Murray, you know, with his experience, the 10, JJ Hanran as well. So the real decision makers are, and you know...
Is there a lack of leaders in that group, Quinny?
I think there's leadership qualities there. There's no doubt about that, because you can't not have leadership with experience. And guys, Peter O'Mahony's the captain. They're all internationals. CJ Stander. You know, there's a lot of really big players in there. But I think the leadership and the decision-making on the field and the ability to see where space is and change things on the go is a problem for them. And it's something that the best teams do on the run. You know, you take the lead. How do you shut up shop without being really negative and stop playing and you know, things like that have to happen on the go. So there is issues there, and that's something that they've got to get better at and have more options in the locker, if you like. When a certain thing is not working, how do you change up the game on the run out on the field? I remember having this chat with Joe Schmidt a few years ago. Ireland played England in Twickenham about 5 or 6 years ago, and they adopted approach of little dink kicks in behind the English defence because it was coming up so much, and Ireland kept doing that, and then England kind of dropped Danny Kerr back into that position, and he catches one of them, makes a line break up the field, scores a try. But Ireland kept doing that. And I remember writing an article and having a debate with Joe afterwards saying, I thought Ireland should have changed the tactic up out on the field and realised Kerr was back in that position, hoovering up those little kicks in that space in behind. And they kept doing it, and they ended up losing the game. It wasn't the sole reason they lost the game. But that's the brilliant kind of leadership that you want. That's hard sometimes to develop, but it's a vision of being able to see where space and opportunities are on the field. And that's something they need to get better at. You know, it's difficult sometimes for Conor Murray because his head is down, he's sprinted from ruck to ruck. Sometimes your 10, 12, 13 can see the way the game is unfolding a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that's something they definitely need to get better at.
Alan Quinlan, enjoy the final tomorrow. Chat to you next week.
Cheers, lads. Thanks.
Alan Quinlan there on the line. He'll be with us again on Monday morning to reflect on Leinster against Ulster. Right, OTB Sports in partnership with Cadbury FC have kicked off a brand new series of in-depth chats with some of the biggest names in football. The second episode is an absolutely star-studded lineup. We've got Ian Wright and Sol Campbell sitting down for an in-depth chat, which will be brought to you on OTB social channels and OTB Sports Radio next Thursday, the 17th of September. Check out cadburyfc.com for updates and promotions and giveaways. At 9:14 on this Friday morning, it is time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
OTBsports.com is where we start as ever this morning, and the lead on OTBsports.com is Andy Friend. That's an article from the piece we already did with him. We do tackle it front on. Andy Friend has been talking about Connacht's discipline. We've got Leopardstown tips on the homepage there as well. And if you're with the county is number one. There's been a GAA club versus county debate there. Just on the screenshot there on screen, you will have had N'Golo Kante and John Giles comments on him. N'Golo Kante will be the last Chelsea player I'd sell, according to John Giles. The Irish Independent this morning, a photograph there of John Sheridan on the back page. He's walked away from Waterford and joins Wigan after just 65 days. The main story here by Colm Keys, county squads face culls in bid to reduce expenses. So reducing inter-county squad numbers will be encouraged because the GAA will now seek a centralised system for the payment of expenses to players, where Croke Park will pay the mileage and nutrition allowances for players and backroom directly. But it is going to be capped at 32 squad members. That is the one caveat of Croke Park paying those expenses. So that will naturally lead to either a cull in your squad numbers or else the county boards themselves paying for the additional expenses. So probably it'll be the county board themselves paying for additional expenses when it comes to the top teams anyway. And also the other story there in the back of the Irish Independent, Amazon primed to broadcast Ireland's clash with England at Twickenham. The Irish Times this morning leads with the Premier League. Ancelotti confident Rodriguez's best years lie ahead at Everton. Colombian star says he had no hesitation when asked to join club by former boss. You've also got Chelsea rejecting Inter offers for Kante. Bielsa confirms he is staying at Leeds, and Souness backs Liverpool to see off tougher challenge on way to retaining title. And as mentioned in that Alan Quinlan piece earlier, there's a good piece on Ulster. Impossible is nothing. Beating Leinster might be trickier. And then Ireland's clash with England to be shown on Amazon as well is their rugby story on the Irish Times. The Irish Sun is next. Pot shots is the main headline here, encapsulating two stories. Lampard saying, I'm here for the title, not for the top four. And Daniel Levy saying Jose is here to win Spurs trophies. Next up is the Irish Examiner. 48 days later is their headline, with the Premier League trophy being carefully handled. Daniel Storey has gone through some of the big storylines in the Irish Examiner this morning. The Irish Daily Mail, over the line is the headline here as they lead with the new deal for Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, putting pen to paper on a new deal at Arsenal, and Ireland's depth to be tested by gruelling run. That comes back to the rugby fixtures, Six Nations into the into the Autumn Nations League. Nations Cup, not Nations League, Nations Cup. Very, very different things. Back page of the Irish, I'll get it eventually. Back page of the Irish Mirror is Fandemic. Villa chief warns shutting out all crowds will cost Premier League clubs £100 million a month. And Bielsa says Leeds is my home. Ella boost as Marcelo agrees a new £6 million deal. Next up is the Irish Daily Star. Locked and loaded is the headline here. Only title will do for Blues after summer spree. That is more from Chelsea and Frank Lampard's press conference yesterday, and Kieran Cunningham today writing that fans are to be let back in. Supporters expected to be given the green light to return to sporting events next week. Micheál Martin, Minister for Sport, Catherine Martin and Ronan Glynn all feel that for mental well-being, spectators should be allowed back if in line with public health advice. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually does happen. Bielsa, I'm the coach, is the headline on the back of the Herald this morning. And also John Sheridan to leave after just 65 days. The Racing Post, Phoenix suspended from having runners in Britain. This is Phoenix Thoroughbreds who've been suspended by the BHA from having runners in Britain until further notice. This is because the group had its racing accounts frozen on Monday. And then the back page is Champs can show they are top class. It's more in the cricket, England against Australia, getting underway from 1 o'clock this afternoon. A couple of the UK back pages. Then The Guardian leads with a photo there of Geraint Thomas. 100% I want to be back on the tour, he says. You've got takeover still on the table. At least that's the question they ask. Newcastle's recent signings taken from Saudi shopping list, writes Louise Taylor. We'll discuss that in just a moment. The Daily Telegraph says that the U-turn is to cost clubs £150 million a month. That is a U-turn on allowing fans into stadiums if that goes ahead. And Premier League to drop shirt logo for Black Lives Matter. The Premier League is to drop the Black Lives Matter logo from the player shirt after a meeting with team captains, replacing it with its in-house No Room for Racism campaign sleeve badge. And the back page, finally, of the London Times, a photograph there of Virgil van Dijk and a couple of stories here. Holding fury over cricket's racism stance. West Indies icon, teams should still take a knee, he says. Legal threat to World Rugby, meanwhile. French clubs have filed a legal case with the European Commission in Brussels, which fundamentally challenges World Rugby's authority and its ability to run international rugby. So this legal document, which was filed on Wednesday, says that French clubs are complaining that World Rugby and have insisted that its contents remain confidential, so that World Rugby will have to answer the Commission's first questions without exact knowledge of the complaint. So they've lodged some description of a legal challenge here. It's thought to be with relation to World Rugby's Regulation 9, which dictates that players must be available by their clubs to play for their countries in international test windows. So French clubs looking to take further control of their players. And angry rebuff to Newcastle. The row over the failed takeover of Newcastle United has taken another extraordinary twist, says the back of the Times, after the Premier League released a statement hitting back at the club and insisting that it has not formally rejected a Saudi-backed takeover. So Adrian, you're telling me there's still a chance that we have another nation state wading into the Premier League?
It puts it makes a mockery of the word saga, doesn't it? It's at a whole new. There should be a new entrant into the dictionary under saga. But I mean, no better man than Mike Ashley. The story that I wanted to look at in relation to it was Louise Taylor in The Guardian this morning.
Yeah.
Takeover still on table, she says. Newcastle's secret signings taken from Saudi shopping list. And this was a wrinkle to the story that I didn't expect, I have to admit. Maybe in hindsight that was foolish, but Newcastle's signings over the last while. So Louise Taylor writes, it's understood that Callum Wilson and Ryan Fraser, the striker and winger acquired from Bournemouth, and Jamal Lewis, the left back bought from Norwich, were identified as transfer targets by advisors to the prospective new owners last spring, when that 300 million takeover appeared to be a formality at that point. So given, she says, that Wilson is 28, Fraser 26, and all three are British, their arrivals marked a departure from what Newcastle would normally do, which is to buy foreign players who were under 25, and that everybody was bought into that idea. So it's a slight shift in the policy. So
can I just say first of all, Callum Wilson, Ryan Fraser and Jamal Lewis, if you were claiming that we had a monopoly on identifying these kind of under-the-radar talents, then you're talking absolute nonsense. I mean, Liverpool tried to sign Jamal Lewis. How many clubs went for Ryan Fraser? Callum Wilson has been one of the best strikers in the lower reaches of the Premier League for the last few years. Has had his injury troubles. If you went into FIFA, you could sign these players. Never mind actually putting together a scouting department to actually sign these players. I don't think this is a very kind of strong argument. And what is their point here? Is their point that this is plagiarism of some description?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, if the strategy is to acquire a different type of player, and then they've gone for those players, even though, like you say, it's not as if it was rocket science, they were available, but they are generally counter to the general signings under Mike Ashley, then maybe that's fair enough. It looks to me like somebody did Mike Ashley's homework for him, and he was happy enough to yoink it off the table and pass it up to the teacher and slap his own name at the bottom of it and go, listen, this is absolutely my work. I don't care. You might think that the other guy looks as if he might have done it. The other interesting part of this story is that, it appears, according to this article, that the prospective regime that were incoming had already done a whole pile of work on this. So, they'd been off having conversations with the players before they'd even bought the club. I don't know the ins and outs, but surely there must be something wrong with that somewhere along the line. They weren't even involved in the club, and they were going talking to players. I find the whole thing pretty remarkable. The yoinking of the homework, far less so. But the fact that conversations are ongoing, I don't believe it's any indication that the deal might possibly be back on. But listen, it's fair enough to say that also in the dictionary under basket case, entry number 1, Newcastle United.
Stranger things have definitely happened. Richard Masters said that the Premier League has acted appropriately. And it almost seems like the Premier League are moving themselves into a position now where they are not strongly coming out against this takeover. Am I correct in saying that they've almost distanced themselves from that little bit? That, this is still on very much, I would have thought, if you're looking at it. There's certainly been a number of roadblocks, and on the balance of things, it's probably not going to happen. But the last couple of days would certainly give you hope if you're a Newcastle fan who is hoping for a couple of billion quid to spend every single season. But I don't know, the young king of the homework, it's like a fill-in-the-blanks homework, and it's multiple choice. The signings they've made.
It's easier to, on the Premier League thing, it's easier to retract from a position of piracy of football rights than it is if they had said, we're not allowing this transfer to go through because they haven't passed our fit and proper person test. You can't put that one back in the bag.
Yeah, that is a good point. Right, let's have a look at the OTB Sports app this morning. You can go get this now on the Google Play Store. It is available in the App Store. All the articles there, reacting to the best stuff from the show, all the breaking news. Got a live radio tab there as well, where you can listen to us every single morning, or you can watch us on the video tab. And all the podcasts there. First place to get your podcasts is on the OTB Sports app. It is new, it is out now, and you can get it on your app store. Right, so the NFL is back, and our American football show, The Snap, is back. Be sure to sign up to our American football newsletter, OTB Club Gridiron. We've got the latest American football news from both Ireland and the USA from offtheball.com, as well as podcasts and long and short form video content, all included. You can subscribe at offtheball.com/Club Gridiron and enjoy all that OTB Club Gridiron has to offer. Right, we are turning our attention to the tennis. Cullen Buhig, a very good morning to you. We don't have Cullen. Oh, you're muted there. There you are.
Hello.
How are you? Right, let's talk Serena last night, first of all, dumped out of the US Open. I think, in fairness, you were saying earlier in the week that you weren't hugely confident that she would go all the way on this particular occasion. She won the first set 6-1, though, did she? Is it a situation where the endurance just isn't where it was a couple of years ago, or did Azarenka just storm into it?
She absolutely annihilated Victoria Azarenka in the first set, as you say, 6-1, and she has a fantastic record against Azarenka. She's 18-4 going into that match, and in the 10 times that they played each other in Grand Slams, Serena has won all 10, including the 2012 and 2013 US Open finals. And the 2013 US Open final is the last Grand Slam final that Azarenka has appeared in. She's been in the relative wilderness the last few years. So this is more about the Azarenka redemption as opposed to any Serena capitulation. Unlike the last 4 Grand Slam finals with Serena, where she was comprehensively beaten in straight sets, this was actually a great match. And Serena has been playing really tough, enduring games all US Open. In fact, since the third round, she's gone the distance. And the reason I thought that in the last 24 hours that she actually might get to the final is because, unlike in those previous 4 finals, since she's come back from maternity leave and lost them all, she sweat the opposition all the way through en route to those finals. This time around, she's been in battles every single match. And she said after her quarterfinal victory that she was more than prepared to go the distance in all these matches. And the fact that she won the first set, you would have thought she's in a great position here. But she's actually been losing the first set of most of her matches so far. So maybe she got into some sort of comfort zone. Azarenka was imperious in the second set. I think she had one unforced error. And at the start of the third set, Serena picked up a knock and had to get medical attention. And Azarenka took it from there. So it's a remarkable win for Azarenka, who, as I say, kind of came out of nowhere again this year. At 31 years of age, she's far past what would be considered her prime. And here she is in her first Grand Slam final in 7 years.
2 weeks until Roland Garros, essentially. Is Serena Williams going to go into that with a better chance than she did in this? Is it a sense that she's accumulating her journey towards getting back to her very best? Or what's your take on that?
I don't know if she'll ever get back to her best. I mean, she'll be 39 at the end of this month. Now, she has won the French Open 3 times. But I was thinking to myself last night, if she can go all the way here at the US, that would obviously have her equal Margaret Court's all-time record of 24 Grand Slam titles. And I was wondering to myself, will she skip the French Open, skip travelling to Europe in the current climate, and then wait for the Australian Open in the new year, which is also on a hard-court surface, and that is then when she would get her 25th Grand Slam title, and then she could happily retire. So she's under a bit more pressure now to, first of all, equal the record. I thought she had a really good chance. I know I was saying to you earlier in the week that I don't think she'd go all the way, but in the way that she had played this week, I thought that she would. Now that she hasn't, I wouldn't fancy her doing it at the French. Out of the 4 Grand Slams, it's the one that she's won the least, although she still has won it 3 times. So I would think that she would need to win the Australian Open, and then maybe next year's Wimbledon could be the 25th title, and then she could happily retire just on the eve of her 40th birthday.
It's going to be Osaka up against Azarenka at the weekend. Like, we've had many conversations over the course of the last few years about who is the successor to Serena and how it's kind of been a bit of a jumble competitively. It definitely seems profile-wise at this point, Naomi Osaka is set to become the face of tennis. Like, is that fair to say? Like, I mean, you see the face mask protest throughout the course of the tournament, which has been fantastic. I guess the fact that she's American really helps, and they see her as kind of like the next Serena potentially over there. Like, I know we've spoken about Coco Gauff and Sloane Stephens and the next generation of American tennis players, but it just feels like Osaka is primed to be the number one.
Well, first of all, on the court, she has an incredible record in Grand Slams when she gets into the final stages. So she's the last player on the WTA Tour to win back-to-back Grand Slams. She won the 2018 US Open against Serena Williams in that very contentious final. And then she won the 2019 Australian Open, and nobody has retained a Grand Slam on the WTA Tour since. Now, this is Osaka's first final since then, and you would back her to beat Azarenka. She has a better head-to-head record. It's 2-1. And the only time Azarenka actually beat Osaka was in the warm-up tournament to this event, which was the Western and Southern Open. And the only reason Azarenka won that final is because Osaka pulled out with a hamstring injury. But what's probably more notable about Osaka in the Western and Southern Open, and what's probably more notable about her in general, is that she stands for an awful lot off the court as well. So Osaka was born in Japan, and she moved to America with her family when she was just 3. And she has been a huge part of the Black Lives Matter protests this summer and the movement. So she actually protested in Minneapolis after the George Floyd murder. And on the eve of her semi-final in the Western and Southern Open, which is the warm-up tournament, as I was saying, for the US Open, she actually withdrew in protest against the Jacob Blake shooting. And it was in line with the NBA protests with the Milwaukee Bucks and the likes. And the tournament amazingly responded to Osaka withdrawing by postponing play for 24 hours, which Osaka thought was incredible because she didn't think that she had the presence and reputation for a tournament to respond to her own individual protest. And because the tournament themselves actually postponed play for 24 hours, Osaka decided to play in the final, but pulled out with a hamstring injury. So this is the rematch, basically, of the match that never happened between Osaka and Azarenka in the final. But Osaka really could be the next star after Serena because, as I say, she stands for so much more than just being a great tennis player.
For fear of doing Bradley Wiggins, of course I knew Osaka was born in Japan and represents Japan, but it definitely feels that America see her as their own. But maybe that's a Bradley Wiggins situation as well? I don't know. Probably a bit more of a national psychology thing.
The more comparisons we can do between you and Sir Brad, we should engage ourselves in that.
100%.
What about the Azarenka, the Azarenka final then, Colin? Like, looking at it, like, Azarenka is a name that for casual fans people would have been like, well, did she not fallen off the face of the planet and disappeared from the game? And she has had stuff going on off the court, but yeah, the match of styles, and I was devastated to wake up this morning, to be honest, that it wasn't a repeat of the 28 final and the mangled racket and the nonsense that went on afterwards. But regardless, what have we got to look forward to?
Well, Azarenka's in the form of her resurgent career anyway. She's an 11-match winning run because, as I say, she won that pre-tournament warm-up. And she has obliterated her opponents up until the semi-final. Now, Serena hammered her in the first set in the semis. But up until that point, Azarenka had dropped 1 set. To put into context about how well Azarenka is playing and how much of a great matchup this final should be, Azarenka hammered Elise Mertens 6-1, 6-love in the quarterfinals. And Mertens, the Belgian, had dispatched easily of Sophia Kenin in the round previous. Kenin's the reigning Australian Open champion. So that's how well Azarenka is playing. But I think, as good as a game as this will be, and I think it will go the distance, it will go into a third, Osaka is faultless when it comes to the major matches. And I think it will go the distance, even though Osaka's carrying that hamstring injury. As I say, she has a better head-to-head record. She's already beaten her at a slam. She beat her Osaka beat Azarenka at the 2019 French Open. So she has a Grand Slam victory over her. And as I say, the only time Azarenka has beaten Osaka was on a technicality because Osaka wasn't fit to play. So I can only see it going one way. And I think, as much of a fairy tale as it would be if Azarenka won, considering her off-the-court problems and the fact that she's come back out of nowhere, I think it's probably great for the women's side that Osaka wins because they haven't had a dominant player in the last 5 years.
Can I just ask you, sorry, Eoin, just one last one, because I think he, and it might be due to the tiredness, the fact that he was up all night, had dodged your question earlier about Osaka and how successful she can be. Like, this could be 3, obviously, she's only 22, so, I mean, Venus at 7 is well within her range. Beyond that?
I don't know if she has the absolute killer instinct and ruthlessness to rack up the Grand Slam titles. She's racked with self-doubt, and it's funny to say that considering she is so brilliant when it really comes to it. But she'll often crash out very early on in Grand Slams, because as I say, this is her first final since the 2019 Australian Open, and since then she's come nowhere near winning a Grand Slam in that time. Now that's 20 months ago, but still there's been a lot of tournaments since then. And for that reason, I think she'll continue to pepper her career with Grand Slams. But I'd say if she got into double figures, she'd be doing well. She's incredibly talented, but like for all these players, like in the top 50 in the world, they have similar enough levels of ability, but it's the mental side of the game. But I think Osaka is already a legend of the game just because of what she stands for.
We're going to have.
She's a hero in that sense.
Very briefly, then we're going to have a new men's champion. We're staring into the void here. This is what the future looks like. A life without the big four. I'm not liking the look of it, to be quite honest with you.
It was a watershed moment, the Novak Djokovic disqualification. But yeah, the game needs it. I mean, even the guys who are in the semi-final.
Do they not need it like a hole in the head to be like? Is it? I mean, how many people are in America, for example, this weekend are going to be watching that over the NFL or over the basketball? If they've actually got a casual interest in all those different sports, there's nothing drawing you to the men's final, I'd imagine. Give us a reason to watch it.
No. There has to be. So this has to happen at some point. Like Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer are all well into their 30s, so there has to be a new player coming through. And the fact is that 3 of the top 5 seeds are in the semi-final here. So the first semi-final, Dominic Thiem against Daniil Medvedev, that should be the final. So if you're not a big tennis fan, you should watch this match on Amazon Prime or Eurosport, because these guys are playing phenomenal tennis. So Medvedev got to the final last year and took Rafael Nadal all the way to a 5th set. You might remember, Owen, we played a clip last year of Medvedev riding the crowd. He did not get on well with the US Open crowd at all. And now he doesn't have the crowd to annoy, so he just annoys his opponents. And he annoys them by being incredibly tactical and just obliterating everyone en route. He's yet to drop a set. But Thiem is like clearly the on-form player in the world, and is so far better than anyone he's played so far. Like, to put it into context, Felix Auger-Aliassime, the young Canadian hotshot, he hammered Andy Murray in the second round, and then Thiem destroyed Auger-Aliassime. So much so that you'd worry about Auger-Aliassime going forward because he got such a pasting. And Thiem he's continued that on. Like, some of his ground strokes, his backhand, he has his one-handed backhand where he hits down the line. And as I say, even if you're not a massive tennis fan, just to watch anybody being that good at what they do is incredible. And for Thiem against Medvedev, you're talking number 2 against number 3. It should be the final. I hope Thiem goes through, only for the fact that Medvedev isn't fit. So, as I say, he hasn't dropped the set, but in his quarterfinal against Andrei Rublev, he picked up an injury right at the end of the 3rd set that he won. And he said after the match, if Rublev had won that 3rd set tiebreak, I would have lost the match because I'm struggling so much at my shoulder. And I don't think that was a tactic on Medvedev's part. I think it's legitimate because he got a medical timeout. So Medvedev might give it all and beat Thiem, but then I would think that the other semi-final winner would have a great chance of winning the whole thing in Zverev or Carino Busta. Now, it would be an incredible story if Carino Busta actually won this thing, because Carino Busta was the man who played Novak Djokovic in that match. He's the answer to the quiz question in 10 years' time, who was Djokovic's opponent. But he could be another answer who was the winner of the 2020 US Open. And if he won it, it would be unbelievable.
I think you've summed it up there. There is a chance that a lot of these people could be quiz questions in the future. And beyond that, who knows? Now, I'm only joking. Enjoy the weekend, Colin. Thanks a million for getting us pumped for the weekend's tennis.
Thanks, lad.
Colin Buig there on the line. We are almost done this morning. Just to let you know what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio today. At 1 o'clock, we've got OTB Gold with Emmanuel Petit. The Paddy Power half hour is coming your way at 1:30. Friday night racing from 3 o'clock. League of Ireland legend Liam Coyle in conversation with Team 33 at 4 o'clock. And then OTB Gold is focusing on the life and times of Johnny Kilban at 6 o'clock. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. If you don't have the OTB Sports app already, search OTB Sports in your app store. We've got live and exclusive national radio commentary this weekend, of course, because the Premier League is back. On Off the Ball this Sunday, we've got 2 live games. West Brom against Leicester City at 2 o'clock will be watched by Stephen Doyle and Kenny Cunningham. And then at 4:30, Brian Kerr will be alongside Nathan Murphy to watch Spurs against Everton. And the OTBAM Fantasy Premier League is live. The code is I'm not going to read out the code. We'll put up a little super on the screen when we get to Dave Moore in just a moment. So keep an eye on that. If you're listening to us, go check out our Twitter account. We have it there. I'm not going to read out the code because you probably don't have a pen and paper. Right, after this break, we leave you with this from Dave Moore from Dermot and Dave, who is a self-confessed fantasy football obsessive.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB Sports, in partnership with Cadbury FC, have kicked off a brand new series of in-depth chats with some of the biggest names in football. The second of these sees Ian Wright.
I love watching great players play. I love watching great games.
And Sol Campbell sit down for an in-depth chat, which will be brought to you on OTB social channels and OTB Sports Radio on Thursday, 17th of September. Check out CadburyFC.com for updates on promotions and giveaways.
Brady and Belichick have been at the forefront of the credit in New England for the last 20 years.
OTB's American Football Show, The Snap on OTB Sports Radio.
Burrow very much thrown in the deep end. He seems to have the correct temperament. I've never been totally won over by his actual talent, to be honest.
Keep updated with American football on OTB. Tune into The Snap every Friday on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
All right, we are returning to our Fantasy Premier League coverage. It is a brand new season this weekend. It is Game Week 1, which means everybody is interested in Fantasy Premier League. One person who's been interested at all times, and of course we'll go all the way to Game Week 38, is Dave Moore of Today FM. Dave, you are an expert, a legend of Fantasy Premier League. I've been informed.
Yeah, if expertise is finishing really poorly due to transfer addiction, then absolutely, that is me. I lose so many points because I'm constantly kind of going, okay, I know it'll cost me 4 points to get rid of him, but I could make 5 points, and I make -1 point, and it's just the worst.
Okay, so this is your tactic. You are a maverick. You go out and chase points no matter what the points cost.
Yeah, I shouldn't, and I tell myself every season, I say, no, don't put 12 million midfielders in and have a terrible bench. Do something, make sure your bench can work for you. But then I don't. I have like a 4 million, a 4.5 million, whatever, and I'm sitting there going, haha, this is it. And then, no, every week I just get let down.
You remind me of my dad, who rings me on a Sunday evening, delighted with himself when two of his midfielders have scored twice in the Sunday games. And I'd say, but I didn't think you had them in your team. He's, I did 6 transfers, though, on Friday night. Yeah. But you've literally lost points. You have lost points, even with them both scoring twiise.
Yeah, that's definitely
getting to Game Week 38 is a good point, though, because I like listening. The professor who won it last year, is like, clearly he's a professor, so he's somebody very successful in life. There's the guy, the chess grandmaster, who was right in contention to win it. There's a certain discipline involved in fantasy football that says a lot about a person, that actually you can go 38 weeks of the year and remember without fail to update your fantasy football team.
That was the hardest thing I thought about the post-lockdown thing, was when the games came thick and fast. It was like, because you're used to this kind of week on, and occasionally you'd be like, oh, don't forget there's a Friday game, or City are playing twice this weekend, or whatever it is. It's some kind of, little bit of information going around. But all of a sudden it was like, yeah, so the game's starting on Thursday, ending on a Friday, starting on Sunday, beginning on Tuesday. You're like, what's happening? Like, you just couldn't cope with that.
And it's not actually going to be too dissimilar at certain points this season as well. I think now, I think sometimes you can talk about the professor, you can talk about Magnus Carlsen. Of course, they're on like a whole different level to some people potentially. But I genuinely believe the number one thing for success in Fantasy Premier League this season is persistence. As you say, just sticking with it for the whole thing, because it's nothing to do with like football knowledge come the end of the season. It's just to do with the fact that you have checked the fixtures and you realise, most importantly, if your team is not playing or if your team is playing twice. I really think that if you have a bad start, but you're there in and around game week 20, when the Carabao Cup fixtures are starting to be rescheduled, when you've got those doubles and those blanks coming, that is when you can make real hay. And there ain't that much intuition involved in actually making benefits from those weeks, I think.
I think captaincy plays a big role as well. I don't know how these people do it, but like when some random Brighton defender gets a hat-trick and like you look at the team of the week and you're like, how did he choose to triple captain him? And he's got 90-something points. I don't understand it.
Well, it's funny you picked Brighton defender, because isn't one of the great stories of last season's, or was it the previous season, was that somebody triple captained Shane Duffy.
Shane Duffy, yes.
When Shane Duffy came off the bench and scored an own goal.
That can happen. Dave, how do you go about, I know you're a big Manchester United fan, so do you find it tough to pick Liverpool players, to pick Manchester City players, or do all club loyalties go out the window for Fantasy Premier League?
I wish I had the cold calculating head of Magnus Carlsen. No, I always have 3 Man United players, no matter how badly they're doing. And in the last 7 years, it's been obviously yet another Achilles heel of mine. Yeah, I mean, Liverpool, it was easier to ignore them for a while, but when Mo Salah is consistently doing what Mo Salah does and Sadio Mane is coming in second, you're just like, oh, Jesus. And then the defenders kill you. I mean, like, let's be honest, you can't have a fantasy Premier League team and not have Trent. Like, it's just impossible. He's an absolute must-have. So you can make decisions between Aubameyang, who obviously has moved back from a forward to a midfielder this season, and maybe Aubameyang is your choice over Salah for the same kind of money. But your defence has to have Trent in it. So I'm sitting there going, bloody hell, I've got to pick this guy. And then he's expensive too. So he's stealing some of your money. But yeah, I think, look, you have to try and park your loyalties, but I think actually Man United and Man City obviously don't play the first game week 1, right? So you would argue that, okay, shoot those players out, get the lads in. But I have probably the strongest bench I've ever had. So currently I have Nyland in goal as a kind of a 4 million keeper. But I have De Bruyne, Bruno Fernandes and Jack Grealish on my bench. Because my logic is, if I want to buy these players after game week 1, they're going to cost me so much money. But if I put them on the bench now, I have them for game week 2.
Jack Grealish, that is, I must say, a bit of a wild card. I didn't expect you to have him on your bench. We may just start with that. What was the thought process behind bringing in Grealish, given you've already got a lot of money spent on other options in your midfield? So just to clarify, is it just De Bruyne and Bruno, or have you gone for another premium midfielder?
Yeah, I have gone for premium midfielder. So this game week 1 currently, and look, this is not, we're not quite at game week 1, so this may change a lot. But currently, I have a 2-man midfield, which seems crazy, but that's because when I look at the Man United players, the one I want in there is Bruno. When I look at the Man City players, the one I want in there is De Bruyne. And then I looked around at the other, I mean, Burnley aren't playing obviously as well, and Villa. I think that's an important thing that people won't necessarily have in their minds, is that, like, there are 2 other clubs that won't play because Man City and Man United are postponed. But yeah, I don't think 5-2-3 is a winning formation for the season, but currently that's where I'm at. So Aubameyang and Lundstram are the 2 I've got in there. As I said, I just think your choices, for me anyway, are you're going to spend big on a midfielder. It's going to be either Aubameyang or Salah, or maybe if you're able to do it, you might do both. But I've got Aubameyang, De Bruyne, Fernandes as my kind of big spends.
Should we talk about the elephant in the room of this year's game? That they've made an absolute balls of it by putting every good player in as a midfielder.
Yeah.
That they haven't moved with modern football, whereby teams play with 3 up front. So you have Salah and Mane as midfielders. You have Aubameyang as a midfielder. Like, Aubameyang is not a midfielder.
Rashford and Greenwood are now midfielders.
It's madness.
This is a thing. This is a really positive thing. Like, first
why
of all,
is it positive on?
because you've got 5 midfield slots and you've got 3 forward slots. That, I presume, is the reason why they've done this, is that you can actually make it was too easy before. It was too easy when you were like, well, Aubameyang, that's definitely a forward slot. If Salah and Mane are down as forwards, well, that's definitely another forward slot. So you're basically deciding, do I go for Danny Ings or Alexander Mitrovic as your forward? And that's your front three boxed off. They want to make it more challenging for people. And my front three are categorically shite at the moment as a result of it. That would not be the case if Aubameyang was a forward. So this is an added complication. I like this, but it is obviously...
It's a huge added complication, and I think it's going to cause a lot of frustration because, as you know, you're trying to balance those first couple of weeks, as Dave is, with Bruno Fernandes, Raheem Sterling, Kevin De Bruyne, players like that. But one of those players, when you throw in the likes of Heung-min Son as well, one of those players is going to have a good week every week. And the most people can really have, in all likelihood, is maybe 2 of them. So you're just hoping that somehow, and if you don't, and in all likelihood to be your captain, you're going to lose a load of ground.
Yeah.
No, that is true. That is absolutely true. And it does make it makes it far more challenging to pick out the right captain at the right time, I think, because they're so expensive, those midfielders. But you look at them and you go, well, you know, points return, they're justifiably expensive. So, yeah, it's difficult. And then don't forget the transfer window is open till October 5th. So, you know, like for example, that's another reason why Grealish was in my mind, Owen, was because if this rumoured Manchester United move, which I actually don't think will happen, but I do think he might go somewhere before October 5th, you know, all of a sudden you have a player going to a premium club where hopefully he'll be surrounded by better players, will play better. You know, he scores well regardless, even at Villa. So then all of a sudden you're kind of going, well, is he my second or my third Man United player?
Never mind that. Like the 3 most expensive players, sorry, Sheahan, are Aubameyang, Mane and Salah at 12 million. What if actually Lionel Messi goes, you know what, screw this, I am out of here. What does Lionel Messi cost?
13,
like,
I would say.
Is he
15? Maybe. I'd say 13.5, possibly.
They probably have Messi down as a midfielder.
They would have Messi in the absolute
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
I mean, does the fact that City and United play in week 2 complicate things from a wildcard point of view? Because I'm coming at this from a bit of time away from fantasy. My brother has convinced me to take it up again this year, but I was one of those players who held on to the wildcard for as long as possible. I'd be on week 36 still going on. I'm not going to use it yet. I'm basically shitting myself in case I blow it. So does the City United thing maybe make people use the wildcard a bit earlier this year?
I think that's a real possibility. I think that people could go in week 1 with a plan, use wildcard, because there's theories around wildcards that I've heard. One is obviously that you have 2 in the season. So you've one up to Christmas and you've one after Christmas. So you could use your one early in maybe, I mean, game week 1 is really early, but or game week 2, whatever. But then you know there's another one coming in January. Or I've heard other people, the theory is, no, you wait and use it as close to Christmas as possible, and then use the other one in game week 36. Yeah. And then that can kind of give you that final boost. I don't know which one is right. I've never gotten it right, so I'm no authority from that point of view. But I think there will be people who will use a wild card in game week 2, definitely.
For sure. And the point that you touched on there about the transfer window is interesting, because certainly you wouldn't be using your second wild card any season before February 1st. At least you could wait to see how the January market would go, and then you make your move. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged thing. You're right with the 4 blanks in game week 1. There's also going to be a little bit of chaos with COVID, you expect, over the first couple of weeks, and you've got a transfer market that is still open. This is going to be an early wildcard season for everyone. I'm thinking game week 6 as the latest, but a lot of people do it after game week 1 because you get the form, and in this season you get United and City players into your team.
Should there be a new rule that if your player gets COVID, you get a free transfer?
Well, that's like, what is seriously going to be a thing? I mean, already we know Emerick Laporte and Riyad Mahrez are, have been diagnosed. Paul Pogba's been diagnosed. I know there's an extra week, so I think sure he'll be fine and whatever, will be back. But this is going to happen throughout the season, that there'll be, okay, yeah, this player has been diagnosed, so therefore he's just going to, and that could be Friday evening, that could be Saturday, morning after the deadline. And
well, as well, Dave, and listen, if you take fantasy football seriously, you do your research and you try and get any little edge that you have, and then so when you hear of, say, Manchester City players, well, you're obviously trying to get onto their social media, and who were they on holidays with? Oh, they were in Ayia Napa. Well, let's see who else was in Ayia Napa. Could they have been in the same restaurant the same night? And suddenly, maybe that's the edge you can get. If you can predict which players are going to get COVID, you can get them out of your team. Boom.
The annoying thing is that they're all French players from other teams. Like the whole problem that Foden and Greenwood had at the England camp, and their misjudgment of everything they did. Like they're rival clubs, but they're best mates. So this is difficult social stuff to keep a track on.
It's okay for Premier League commentators like Nathan Murphy who commit to researching every week regardless, so they have a head start than the rest of us. But
Misha and Dave have real jobs.
Yeah, trying to find the time to, like, I don't know, Dave, when, like, do you be sitting there glued to the team news? Do you be sitting with a pen and paper researching for a few hours each week? Or how do you go about it? Because we're not all Premier League commentators like Nathan Murphy.
No, we're not. I wish I was. No, I don't. I keep an eye on Sky Sports News on a Friday, and I keep an eye on YouTube for the managers' press conferences. So I will have a look. I mean, you don't glean too much, but I suppose it really is that kind of Friday evening is kind of my bulk. The bulk of my work is like, okay, sit down. Who do I think is going to do well this week? I used to actually play a football prediction game called Predicta, and you would also predict the scores rather than fancy football. It was like just basically betting on the scores. And I found that actually was when I performed best at fantasy football, was when I was in tandem, I was doing Predicta. So I would look at it and say, oh, do you know what? I think that might be a 3-1 win for whoever, for Spurs. And then I'd go, well, if I think that, then I should probably put a Spurs player in my fantasy team. So they were kind of feeding into each other. And I had a couple of half-decent seasons where I didn't utterly embarrass myself. But look, par for the course for me is, like, as I said, finishing 3,000th in my own league, which is just so.
But on that, sorry, and I've let you have 15 minutes here. And I don't want listeners and viewers to think that I'm just here as a random other person with an interest in fantasy football. I know you've had the professor and you can talk about your chess grandmasters. I'm here because I'm an expert and extremely successful at fantasy football. So I will remind you that back in 08-09, I finished 32nd in fantasy football, second in Ireland.
12 years ago.
Doesn't matter. I'm just looking back through my rankings. So what is a good ranking? Because I'm looking here, around that time, I had 4 years in a row where I finished inside the top 20,000.
Yeah,
I haven't had one of them in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
But the numbers have obviously have grossly mushroomed in the last years. Like, I remember I started playing fantasy football in the 90s, because I'm older than all of you boys.
In the Star.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. There was a website, but God, it was so terrible.
I ran as my transition year project a company that did a fantasy football league within the school, and I did it from the start. Oh my God, it was the most time consuming, and I was in transition. Like, it was a waste of time. So I basically charged everyone a tenner to enter my own fantasy football league, and it was based off the Star. But I spent all, like, Monday evening then for 8 hours having to manually collate everybody's scores.
This is why you finished second in the world.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I put the work in at the time.
Yeah, no, look, I think that my rankings would not inspire confidence in anybody. But like I said, I justify it by saying I enjoy fantasy football immensely every Friday. You know, a tie from down the road, Coke Zero, ice cold, and sit down and go, right, how are we going to wreck it this week, lads?
That is a war room.
Yeah.
Right, so let's actually just get the rest of your team there and what else you're thinking, Dave. Like, I must say, I'm just looking at Grealish's ownership. I was at around 12%, so he's obviously owned by a lot more people than I had given you credit for, Dave. What else are you looking for in the forwards? Let's go with your three forwards.
Okay, my three forwards, obviously I've overloaded the midfield, and I've overloaded looking at game week 2 currently. So my forwards are the Danny Ings is definitely in there. I do think Danny Ings is going to do well. I think Shea Adams actually might be a good shout for Southampton as well. But I suppose it'll be one or the other. And obviously Danny Ings did so well last season. I'm kind of putting faith in him. Rodrigo at Leeds. I think a lot of people are making the choice between Rodrigo and Mitrovic. And I like Rodrigo. I'm a Spanish football nerd as well. So I've kind of seen him over the years do things. So I don't know. He's not 20 goals a season, but I do think if Leeds are going to do well, he'll be part of that.
That's very interesting. So he's on 7.7% ownership. Mitrovic is on 26.7% ownership. So it's a differential.
Yeah, they love Mitrovic. Well, look, he's good value. He's proven to a degree, but Fulham. I mean, first game is Arsenal.
Oh, Arsenal. Sorry, yeah.
Arsenal.
Fulham were terrible 2 years ago, and he got into double figures. So if you got that out of him again.
Yeah, that's no. Look, I think that's why he's so popular. My third one is Brewster at Liverpool, and I don't know how much he's going to play. He might even go on loan or something. I don't know.
Well, they're talking about him going on a permanent deal. So actually, he looks like he could be a great signing now because again, he's probably not going to get much game time at Liverpool. Yeah. But if he goes to one of those other sides if he goes to Palace or something like that, suddenly you've got 4.5 million who might end up playing quite a bit.
Yeah, no, because I was surprised because often what I'll do is I'll put that in as the cost. I'll put down 4.5 and see is there anyone there that any name you'd even recognise. And I saw him and I just went, do you know what? He's worth. If you're looking for a 4.5, he's worth it. You probably shouldn't be. You should be looking for a couple of sixes and a 9 or whatever. But yeah, that's what I've gone with the most. So Ings, Rodrigo, and Brewster. Yeah, like I said, with a bench that would embarrass anybody.
But there you go. This is what I'm talking about, a front three that we can actually be interested in. If this was 12 months ago, we'd be saying your front three, oh yeah, quite boring, let's move on. We've actually got to put in a bit of effort. I like the Ryan Brewster pick, especially if there's a bit of future potential there. Let's go to the back then. I assume you've picked Trent Alexander-Arnold, considering you've just said he's essential.
Yeah, Trent is in there. And then everyone else is kind of... I've gone with James at Chelsea. Chelsea are a really interesting team. You would look at their transfer window and go, oh my God, they're going to blow everyone away and win the league. But they're bringing in so many players. I don't know how they're all going to gel really quickly. But I think there's a couple of good value players in there. Look, Havertz is an unbelievable signing. He's scored so much from midfield. You would think he's probably worth a punt. But I don't know. James, for me, is someone who performed so well last season, a little bit under the radar. I think he's 5, is he? I think maybe 5 million or something like that. So yeah. He's not massively expensive. I do think he'll play in most weeks because I don't know, Chilwell, he's certainly not match fit yet. I'm happy with him for now. I've gone for, if heard this guy Salisu at Southampton? He's some new signing. He's cheap as chips. Southampton have done pretty good stuff in the transfer market before. I've taken a punt on him. Eoin at Leeds is also pretty cheap, but again, he's an attacking. Because obviously that's why Trent is so successful. Liverpool don't have the best defensive record, but Trent is just so potent, and Eoin isn't quite up at that standard, but he's there. And then I had 4 million left, so I went with Burr at Wolves again, just because I saw him a few times last season, and he played, and I had 4 million to spend. So I don't know how strong. Certainly on game week 1 as a back 5, I'm not massively inspired with confidence, but I had to get them in there somewhere.
And who are your 2 goalkeepers then, just to get a greater sense of your defence?
McCarthy, Southampton. I think again, value for money. He's really hard to ignore. And Nyland is just kind of sitting there as a 4 million. But I think McCarthy is he 4.5 or 5, maybe 4.5 or 5. But he's certainly good enough value for me to kind of go, look, you know what? That's the keeper I need in there. So so that's so the team is the 2 goalkeepers, McCarthy and Nyland, 5 at the back. Alexander-Arnold, Salisu, James, Eoin, and Burr. I've got Aubameyang and Lundstram starting with De Bruyne, Fernandes, and Grealish on the bench, and Ings, Rodrigo, and Brewster up front. So, like I said, it's a bit of a strategic one rather than a gut feeling. So we'll see how that pans out for me.
Bruno Fernandes gets COVID on Sunday week.
Sancho will be in very soon. Jadon Sancho straight in.
Yeah, what do we think about the transfer market? Is there anything, are we hearing anything else? Sancho's obviously the big one, but there's Reguilon, this Real Madrid left back that people are talking about maybe coming to Old Trafford, and
James Rodriguez as well. I'd say his ownership has flown up just because of the star status of his name, but I assume a lot of people are going to have him in the team. Maybe he'll be class. Who knows? He plays well under Ancelotti, so he's one that maybe could be a sneaky one.
One I would recommend for the defence, if you're looking for lower priced, is Tariq Lamptey at Brighton.
Lamptey, yes.
Right back. Brilliant last season. They brought him in from Chelsea last January and is going to be the first choice right back, I would expect, all season. And bombs up and down. Now, didn't score a lot of goals, but I think he's only 4.5 million. Yeah. And another one, keep it Irish, Darragh O'Shea. Very cheap. Probably going to play every week for West Brom. Not going to get you a huge amount of clean sheets, but might nick you the odd one here and there.
Are there any free kick taking defenders? I know, obviously Trent is one. Van Aanholt, Luca Dean, yeah. They're not cheap though.
Do you get one of the most expensive?
Do you get an assist for winning a penalty? I assume you do.
You do.
Donny van de Beek, I think, has some serious stats in the Eredivisie for winning penalties, which will have Bruno Fernandes licking his lips. But
that's the only way is there a Manchester United player who doesn't have incredible statistics for winning penalties?
Fair point.
I think that bubble is going to burst, I think, this season. But just on the defenders, and Irish players, I find it very interesting that we're not really talking about Matt Doherty, and he's got an ownership of 26.2%. He's 6 million. He was the top scoring defender, not from Liverpool last season, of course, playing as a wing back. Are we just totally writing off Matt Doherty as a fantasy prospect because he's expensive and he plays for Jose Mourinho?
Jose is the big factor for me. Yeah. I think he is going to have his, whatever you would call this, pre-season, post-season weird holiday thing, where he'll do what he does with his team, and I just don't think adventurous fullbacks. He's not going to play a 5. He's going to, because at Wolves wasn't Doherty in a 5, and now he's going to be in a 4, I think. So I'd love to be wrong because I think Ireland need him to be doing really well, but I just think his demand on him is going to be a lot more defensive than offensive this season under Jose. Is my gut.
Final one then. Who are you putting the armband on this week?
Aubameyang. There's just he did it to Liverpool in the Community Shield. I know you can't really take that as anything more than a pre-season friendly, but he just looked sharp, won the penalty, scored a goal. Based on whatever you've seen in this kind of weird period before the season starts, he just and playing against a side like Fulham, I think Arsenal should have the beatings of them, and then he should be well able to take care of that and get me some points. So that's my plan.
All right. Dave Moore of Today FM, it's been a pleasure picking your brains on what you're looking at for the season ahead. Thanks a million for joining us.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.